Welcome to Orthodox Christian Theology. This is Craig Truglia, and with me today is Agen, and in a little bit we'll be joined by Subdeacon Daniel Kakish. Agen, how are we doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm stoked to be on. Thank you for having me on, Craig.
I'm stoked to be on now. We see this in the live chat. People always underestimate Craig. Are you going to underestimate me today?
I'm overestimating you. I like your work, Craig.
Well, they're probably overestimating. I will say this. I take a passing interest in this issue as much as this is church history. Everything's very interesting. I'm not a zealot considering this issue. This is not my only issue, but I think it's an important issue, and that's why it's worth debating. This might humble you, Agen, but believe it or not, bishops do watch this. What we do here is important, and that's why the conduct of not just us, but those watching the show are very important. It's a reflection of our communions, and we don't want to say anything that would make us ashamed to the clergy who are watching and following this. And so that being said, being that this is the first time Agen and I are debating, and we've had issues with 2-for-1s where people think things aren't fair, even though they're getting just as much time as everyone, we're going to be having a time debate. There'll be 2 15-minute openings. Where I'll be starting because my job is to prove that Chalcedon Cyrillian, and the job of Agen is to prove that it is not. There'll be 2 5-minute rebuttals. There'll be 2 15-minute cross exams. I ask questions, then Agen asks questions. Unless Subdeacon wants to ask questions first, we'll deal with that then. And 2 5-minute closings, and there'll be a 20-minute Q&A, so you'll be able to ask questions in the end, and you'll be able to get responses from both of us. And it'll be 20 minutes total. So that way we try to keep this thing under 2 hours so it's useful. So being that the ground rules are set, are you ready to go, Agen? Ready for my opening?
I'm ready.
All right. And you could keep me honest, and you could tell me the time. I'm going to get started now. So my job is to prove to you that Chalcedon conceptually taught Cyril's Christology. The Council of Ephesus, headed by Cyril, taught, "Let us preserve the recognition of the Godhead in the flesh, the Son of God who speaks in each is one, because each nature is in him." That's the Council of Ephesus. What did Chalcedon teach? This one and the same, Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son, must be confessed to be in 2 natures. Each nature is in him, in 2 natures. You will see tonight that my opponents will try admirably, but their case will be convoluted because Chalcedon was presided over by Cyrillians, men who were personally aware of his thoughts and feelings, and it clearly taught his Christology. The council treats him as a saint. His writings are treated as authoritative. It condemns Nestorius repeatedly as a test of orthodoxy, and its conciliar definition was devised by Cyrillians that used, in the words of Price and Gaddis, Cyrillian expressions that emphasize the oneness of Christ. So in short, Chalcedon Cyril taught that the incarnate Christ was one person with 2 essences and natures, divine and human, after the incarnation. This is called diaphysitism. Now, the handful who did not accept the council, headed by the canonically deposed Dioscorus, never had a cogent response to why Chalcedon was wrong. Well, why? Because they had no good reason. Their schism was ethnically based, and not over the question whether Chalcedon is conceptually correct. The case that Chalcedon is conceptually correct will be made in 4 ways. First, by accurately defining Nestorianism so that one may perceive how disingenuous the claim is that Chalcedon is Nestorian. Second, by accurately explaining what the doctrine of Chalcedon is. Third, by accurately explaining what the doctrine of Cyril is. And finally, by documenting that the immediate generations of non-Chalcedonians responded inconsistently because they had no good reason to reject it. Let's begin. First, what is Nestorianism? It is the idea that the person of Christ is only nominally one because he's in fact separate people. That being, God in his divinity adopted a human and joined him into himself. In other words, adoptionism. Chalcedon is clearly not adoptionist. Now, here is Nestorius in his own words in a sermon condemned during Ephesus. Nestorius said, "For the sake of an illustration of what is meant, note this: if you want to lift up someone who is lying down, do you not touch body with body, and by joining yourself with the other person, lift up the hurt one while you remained what you were. This is the way to think of the mystery of the incarnation. He elsewhere explains in the same sermon, Mary gave birth to the human being, the instrument of the Godhead. And also, God is within the one who was assumed. The one who was assumed is styled God, because the one who assumed him. So we can see Nestorius conceives of two concretely separate people in the allegedly one name slash postperon of Christ. What non-Chalcedonians cannot do is quote any Chalcedonian saint doing this, illustrating Christ as being the God lifting up another person where it's clearly two people. We just don't have that. Now, second, the doctrine of Chalcedon. It could be condensed as follows. We teach with one voice that the Son and our Lord Jesus Christ, as the decree says, is to be confessed as one and the same, consubstantial with the Father as touching his Godhead, and consubstantial with us as touching his manhood. This one and the same Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son, must be confessed to be in two natures, unconfusedly, immutably, indivisibly, inseparably, of each nature being preserved and being united in one person in subsistence, not separated or divided into two persons. Chalcedon affirms double consubstantiality, as Cyril did. Chalcedon employs a terminology into natures, as Cyril did. Most importantly, it is obviously conceptually the same as Cyril, in affirming two natures within the divine hypostasis of God, and clearly different than Nestorius adoptionism. It is slander to say otherwise. So how about Cyril? He explicitly cites Christ being in two natures. In the second letter to Successus, it says the only begotten Son of God, insofar as he's known to be and is God, did not endure the sufferings of the body in his own divine nature, but suffered rather in his earthly nature. Elsewhere, like in Glaphyra, Leviticus 14, it says, prescribes that two living birds, which are clean, should be taken, so that through these birds you may understand both the heavenly man and God at the same time, these being in fact two natures, literally into two natures, the same kind of Greek terminology in Chalcedon, distinct with regard to the properties proper to each one. For when, bird one, the word shone forth from God the Father, bird two, he was from a woman in respect of his flesh, and yet he was not divided, for Christ is one coming from two, divinity and flesh. And that is why two birds are taken. Though these natures exist only in contemplation, which means they don't belong to separate entities, they are real, and they persist after the incarnation. Now, according to Cyril, in the second letter to Successus, each nature is understood to remain in, that's in the Greek, all its natural characteristics, though they are ineffably and expressively united. Such is the case with a human being who comprises of soul and body. These are quite different things, and they are not consubstantial with each other, but when they are united, they constitute the single nature of man. So body and soul are different substances that remain in a single man, just as divinity and humanity remain different substances in Jesus. Furthermore, Cyril was aware of the use of the two-nature Christology that used identical terminology as Chalcedon, and he approved of it. In the canonical letter of 433, it states, "For we know that theologians make some things of the evangelical and apostolic teaching about the Lord common as pertaining to the one person, and other things they divide as to the two natures, and attribute the worthy ones to God on account of the divinity of Christ, and the lowly ones on account of his humanity. He is called the man from heaven," right? Like the heavenly man in Glaphyra, "being perfect in his divinity and perfect in his humanity, and considered as in one person." He also wrote in the letter to Acacius of Medellin, "For he, Nestorius, spoke in this way, God is indivisible from what is manifested. Therefore, I do not divide the honor of him who is undivided. I divide the natures, but I unite the worship." But the Antiochian brothers, taking in mere thoughts only the things out of which Christ is conceived to be, have spoken of a difference of natures, because, as I said, divinity and humanity are not the same in natural quality, but they say that there is one Son in Christ and Lord, and there being truly one person of him, and not in any way do they sever the things united, nor accept a natural separation. In letter 44, he writes to Eulogius, The bishops of the East confess that his person is one and that there are not two sons or two Christ, but one. How do they agree with the teachings in Nestorius? They, the Easterners, separate them, the natures, in this manner. Some are proper to his divinity, others are human, and others have a position in common as being both proper to his divinity and his humanity. Yet they are saints concerning him, one and the same with us. Furthermore, Cyril made a diathylate statement in his second letter to Nestorius, which was accepted during Ephesus. He wrote, if it is not as if the difference of the natures was destroyed by the union. There's a difference of natures. But I would say the smoking gun is this. The decree of the Council of Ephesus cites a diophysite statement from St. Ambrose as authoritative. It states, let us preserve the recognition of the Godhead and the flesh. The Son of God who speaks in each is one because each nature is in him. I looked it up in the Latin. That's what it says. Note in him now the glory of God and now the sufferings of man, that as God, he teaches divine things, and that as man, he says human things because he spoke in my essence. Honestly, the debate is over right now. We have the literal Chalcedonian language in both natures cited as authoritative in Ephesus. But it gets worse for my opponents. Cyril endorsed St. Proclus' Christology, yet Proclus is known to invoke two-nature Christology, teaching a nativity homily, quote Proclus. These both are saints. We therefore understand one Christ, confessing him to be in two natures after the union, divinity and humanity. The Greek's authenticity is affirmed by scholarship. Finally, because Chalcedon is so obviously Cyrillian, the first few generations of non-Chalcedonians had no coherent reason for rejecting it. For example, Dioscorus' own words were used in the Chalcedonian definition, yet instead of being happy, Dioscorus' rejection of Chalcedon was on dishonest grounds. For example, he claimed that Chalcedon rejected the consubstantiality of Christ with both man and God in his letter to the Egyptian monks. If you are right, why would he make such an easily disprovable lie like Dioscorus did? I don't know. Now, the canonically consecrated Timothy the Cat, who was later to become Patriarch Alexandria after St. Proterus' martyrdom, conceptually had a Chalcedonian Christology himself. Ibiad and Wickham translate the following from one of his works. In fact, the flesh had neither hypostasis nor ousia before the conception of God the Logos, that it, after the conception that is, equally could be called a nature, separate and existing by itself. Yet, when refuting Chalcedon, Timothy is both dishonest and lazy. He claims Chalcedon introduces a cleavage of the economy, which means only human nature accomplishes salvation, when Chalcedon explicitly does not do that. Furthermore, despite offering longer refutations to other topics in his book Against the Council of Chalcedon, when quoting Chalcedon's definition, he simply states that Nestorius saying there are two natures in one Christ speaks in this way in the books of his teachings, making no attempt to prove that they conceptually had the same theology. His argument is simply they use the same words in some context, so they must mean the same thing. Now, if we went by that, that would make Cyril a Nestorian. So Timothy also was given to excess in defending the one nature formula, exegeting John 14:28, the Father is greater than I, as pertaining to, quote him, the same divine nature which said, I and the Father are one. Yet Cyril himself says these words belonging to Christ's humanity and not his divine nature in his commentary on John, even using the term human nature twice in his exegesis. And I've looked this up in the Greek just to be sure. For our sake, he has emptied himself of his glory, as has been written, and taken the form of a servant in the dishonor of man's nature. And again, Cyril wrote, how powerless again is human nature, even in Christ. Furthermore, many saints, the non-Chalcedonian communion, maintain communion with Chalcedonians, which demonstrates that their differences were ecclesiastical, terminological, and most importantly, ethnic, not over the faith. Flavian II of Antioch, a Chalcedonian saint, was in communion with John I of Alexandria, which is a Coptic saint. John II of Alexandria, a more strongly non-Chalcedonian saint, was in communion with him for a short time as well. Severus Typos was subscribed to by Timothy I of Constantinople, a Chalcedonian, and they were in communion. We have even a non-Chalcedonian saint permitting an Orthodox interpretation of the Tome of Leo. The aforementioned John I sent a letter in 497 to Rome, which blamed the Greek of being heretical as opposed to the Latin of the tome, because, to quote him, the translators of the letter were those of the followers of the Nestorian heresy. Even though the tome was translated wrong, the letter posed no obstacle to a restoration of communion, according to John I, provided that Rome, to quote him, accepts their confession of faith, which is his election letter, and their saint canonizations. He did not require rejecting the tome or even Chalcedon. So in closing, while Chalcedon manifested literal fidelity to Cyril's thought, it was those who rejected Chalcedon who took issue with the terminology of Chalcedon that Cyril used, that stubbornly did not conceptually interpret Chalcedon, something Cyril did with the Diophysites of his own day when he talked about the Eastern theologians, disagreed with Cyril's own exegesis of scripture and overall irenic approach, and lacked a coherent and honest response to Chalcedon because they could not honestly reject that Chalcedon was Orthodox and Cyrillian. And so, just to bring this all back together for everyone, remember the Council of Ephesus, which is the crown jewel in Cyril's crown in heaven, the council that he put together the Florilegium for, wrote this: let us preserve the recognition of the Godhead in the flesh, the Son of God, who speaks in each is one, because each nature is in him. Chalcedon taught this one and the same, Jesus Christ, the only begotten Son, must be confessed to be in two natures. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. It's obvious that Chalcedon taught Cyril's Christology. It taught the Christology of the Council of Ephesus. And I'll cede any remainder of my time.
Thank you for that. So I'll give my 15-minute opening. Do you want me to do the timer as well, or will you do it?
Sure. I'll look, but you could do the timer.
Okay, I'll start now. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. Thank you, first of all, Craig, for having me on. Like we said, Subdeacon's going to come on in a couple minutes. He's currently driving home. I'd like first to begin what the Christological controversy looked like in the beginning and mid-5th century, leading into the end of the 5th century, which is Chalcedon. First of all, let's introduce the person of Cyril. Cyril was the Patriarch of Alexandria. He presided over the Council of Ephesus in the year 431 to depose Nestorius, who was then the Patriarch of Constantinople. Cyril had correspondence with Pope Celestine in order to get this deposition done with. After 431, when Nestorius was deposed, we had a formula of reunion offered to the bishops of the East through the person of John of Antioch, because we wanted to receive the people who were very, how do I say this, angry with our deposition of Nestorius. So Cyril in his formula had people accept the deposition of Nestorius and affirm some sort of confession that will allow both of us to be in communion. Now, this formula of reunion was technically done on shaky grounds. A lot of the bishops and writers from the East thought that the formula of reunion was a concession from Cyril. And you can find this from Cyril in his letters 33, his epistle 100. So this eventually led to St. Dioscorus, who is the handpicked successor of Cyril, to be able to get rid of these false pretexts for this union. And this happened in the case of Eutychus and eventually the case of Flavian of Constantinople. In the year 448, we have Eutychus being put on trial by Flavian, who is then the Patriarch of Constantinople. And they require from Eutychus to say in two natures after the union. In 449, St. Dioscorus convenes Ephesus II, where they realize that Flavian and also Eusebius of Dorelium were not allowed to use this as a criteria of either anathematizing someone or not anathematizing them. Leo wanted his tome, which is a document he composed, to be read at 449. And this never happened, which led to Leo deposing, in his eyes, Dioscorus, and then having correspondence with the emperor, who is Theodosius II, which eventually became Marcian, to convene a new council to undo Ephesus II. Now, I want to point out, in Chalcedon, there's really one main moment, which is very short, where there's some sort of explanation as to how the tome of Leo, which is the dogmatized teaching of Chalcedon, it's what informs the creed, and Cyril. And it happens in session 2. Session 2 begins with everyone saying, we already signed the creed. And this happened in between 449 and 451, where Cyril, being dead and Dioscorus being in his place, was opposing other bishops, namely Flavian and Domnus, and other bishops were still accepting this tome of Leo and signing on to it. So in this session too, we have bishops that are in some way opposing the tome. They do accept it in the same session, but they have issues with it, to which there has to be 3 responses to 3 passages they have an issue with. They cite Cyril 3 times in order to reconcile those 3 passages. Now, 3 of those responses comparing it with Cyril are completely quote mines. I recommend you read it. But the most important thing I want you to take note of is that Theodoret of Cyrus was one of the people who cited Cyril to make the tome reconcilable with Cyrillianism. And he cites the same exact quote, which he uses in his book, Eranistes, which is a dialogue he has with some man named Eranistes. It's the same exact quote. And in that book, he believes the teaching that's diophysitism is the idea that God was not born, God the Word was not born, but a human being. Now, I didn't prepare a script, so I'll just try and find the quote. It'll take me like 5 seconds. Give me 1 sec. Okay, here it is. So in Eranistes' dialogue 2, he says, there is a plain perception of one thing dwelling in another, namely the divine nature and manhood, without undergoing commixture or any confusion or change into what it was not. For what it is said to dwell in another does not become the same as that in which it dwells. Now, in his dialogue 1, what he's trying to reconcile Cyril with is the following statement. How can you say that they agree with your opinion when you assert that the only begotten God, the Word, underwent birth from a woman, passion and death, while these passages clearly show that it was a man who was born of a woman, suffered, and died? So this is what Theodoret believed after the formula of reunion. And it's even mentioned by Cyril that after the formula of reunion, he was still opposing Cyril's theology. Cyril says against Theodoret, I presumed that the most pious Theodoret, along with the other God-fearing bishops, had wiped from his hands the stain of the innovations of Nestorius. I was of the opinion that once he had written and embraced the peace and accepted in reply my letter addressed to him, he had put out of the way by agreement whatever seemed to stand as an obstacle. But as the most pious priest Daniel imparts to me, he exerted himself only this far without changing the opinions he held in the beginning. He still holds the blasphemies of that Nestorius, and he plainly acts as if he neither anathematized him nor came forth to sign his deposition. Now, when you keep going through Chalcedon, Theodoret was deposed in 449 by Dioscorus, but Leo had him attending the council from session 1, and it wasn't until session 8 where he was, by consent, brought back to his bishopric. Now, the problem here, if he wasn't received until session 8, and Cyril opposed him, you had an anti-Cyrillian citing Cyril in order to make the tome sound Cyrillian. And after this, they have an informal meeting, which is not recorded in any minutes, in order to make the tome sound Cyrillian. Now, one man tried to ask for the 12 chapters to be compared with the tome of Leo, and he was ignored. And I'll get that quote right now. He says, in session 2, Atticus, the most devout bishop of Nicopolis, said, since your magnificence is showing readiness to listen with patience, order it to be granted to us that within a few days what is pleasing to God and to the Holy Fathers may be formulated with calm reflection and unruffled thought. Since the letter of our Master and Holy Father and Archbishop Leo, who administers the Apostolic See, has now been read, we should also be provided with the letter of the Blessed Cyril written to Nestorius, in which he urged him to assent to the 12 chapters, so that at the time of the examination we may be found well prepared. He was ignored, and the next discussion on how the tome is to be compared with Cyril was only ever done in a private meeting. I do not know why it was private. I would have much appreciated it if we could have read it, but the reason why is explained in the same session, because everyone already signed on to the tome. So it's their word against Cyril's word, and we also have to take in light also Leo's word, which I'm going to continue to do throughout this debate. Now, when we get to session 4, Pascasinus, who's the head of the Roman delegation, and he's the legate of Pope of Rome, he announces to everyone that at the private meeting, someone announces at the private meeting, Pascasinus was the one who proved that the tome was Cyrillian. Once again, we don't have these minutes. But then when it came to session 5, this is the nail in the coffin. When they wanted to write a creed, and keep in mind, they were completely opposed to writing a creed in session 1 because they thought it opposed the Cyrillian Canon 7 of Ephesus. When they wanted to write the creed, they included the statement from two natures. But the legates then said they were going to move the council to Italy if they didn't change it to into. And I'll quote this in 1 second, says the following. This is in session 5. It says, Asclepiades, deacon of the great church of Constantinople, read out the definition, which it was decided not to include in these minutes. The most magnificent and glorious official said, Dioscorus said that the reason for Flavian's deposition was that he said there are two natures, but the definition has from two natures. The most magnificent and glorious official said, Dioscorus said, I accept from two natures, but I do not accept two. But the most holy Archbishop Leo says that there are two natures in Christ, united without confusion, change, or separation. And then they said, we believe as Leo does, those who object are Eutychianists. And it even got to a point where some of the bishops said, let those who are opposing our first draft of the creed return to Rome as Nestorian. So the same people who signed on to the tome had a secret meeting we don't have, proving that the tome was Cyrillian, said that if you want to change the creed from to to into, return to Rome, you Nestorian. It wasn't until there was the threatening to go to Italy when they decided, you know what, fine, we're just going to accept into, and that's the creed as we have it today. Now, continuing on, this from to versus into distinction, we find it present technically during the days of the Formula of Reunion. In Epistle 39 of Cyril, we find John of Antioch sending a statement that says there are, the evangelicals make use of two natures. But Cyril only accepted this formula because it said from to. And John of Antioch originally had a prior letter, which Paul of Emesa tried to send, which was cited in the counter synod Ephesus of 431, not the Orthodox one, where it simply said the statement two natures. Cyril didn't accept the formula that said two natures. He accepted the formula which said from to, which is why Nestorius said that from to necessitates Eutychianism. And Cyril in his epistles 44 explains that the reunion was because they affirmed two natures became one nature, and the division is in reason and speculation alone. And the bishops of the East admit one nature as we do, though their sayings are obscure. The way to know that Cyril for sure rejected what we find at Chalcedon is in his two letters to Sexensis. Because after the Formula of Reunion, people in Cilicia were arguing with Sexensis, who's the bishop of Diocesarea, which is a province in Isauria. They tried to press Sexensis as saying two natures, to which Sexensis asked Cyril, are there two natures? Cyril answers, you asked me what I think about two natures. In the mind, we see the two natures coming together into unity, but we do not separate them after the union. As the Holy Fathers have said, there is one incarnate nature of the Word. And he continues at the end of the epistle, and he says one nature without qualification. He doesn't add the term incarnate. He just simply says one nature. Then Sexensis wrote another letter to Cyril and said, they say that the two natures are after the union indivisibly. What do you think about this? And Cyril said the following. Cyril said, this objection is yet another attack on those who say that there is one incarnate nature of the Son. They want to show that the idea is foolish, and so they keep on arguing at every turn that two natures subsist. They have forgotten that it is only those things which are usually distinguished at more than a merely theoretical level, which split apart in differentiated separateness and radical distinction. And then he gives the example of a man, talks about the body and the soul, and then he says, this is why the two are no longer two, but the one living creature is rendered complete. In letter 40, Cyril responds to a letter which was sent by Acacius, where Acacius said, let us anathematize those who say two natures after the union, each one working properly. The same Latin word, which is preserved in Irenaeus for properly, is found exactly in the tome. And Cyril says he is delighted by Acacius's letter, and then says, I will explain to you the reunion. And in this letter, he explains the difference is only a natural quality, and the duality is abolished, and there is a single nature of the Son. Now, Cyril in his epistle 67 condemns people who hate Nestorius and praise Theodore, and he even condemns Theodoret after the Formula of Reunion, as I mentioned. Now, when you get to session 10 of Chalcedon, it deals with Ibas, and then they read a letter of Ibas when they're going through the minutes of Beirutis. They read the letter of Ibas to Mari, which says bad things about Cyril, calls Cyril an Apollinarian, says that Cyril had impiety and he was stricken by it, says that the 12 anathemas were wrong, and praises Theodore of Mopsuestia as a teacher. Therefore, condemning Nestorius isn't a litmus test of being Cyrillian, as Cyril says, you are worse, and this is in letter 67 and letter 63, you are worse than a Nestorian if you feign to hate the teachings of Nestorius, but warp them together by accepting Theodore. Cyril could not have been a Diophysite because he never said there were two natures after the union. We have him verbatim denying it. Now, in the tome of Leo, Leo cites Eutychus, who cites Cyril, and Eutychus affirmed a double consubstantiality in this context at 448. Leo says he started to repent, but he still didn't condemn his heresy. Therefore, Leo believed the heresy of Eutychus wasn't that he didn't affirm double consubstantiality. It's that he affirmed one nature. And this is why at Chalcedon, Constantine mentioned how Flavian supporters omitted the mention of Cyril and Athanasius in the minutes of 448. So the Creed of Chalcedon in the extended form cites the Tome of Leo, which cites Eutychus, which cites Cyril, when Eutychus affirmed a double consubstantiality, and it still condemns this idea of one nature, and the letter Rebuttal also condemns this idea of one nature. So tying it back to in session 2, when they were ignored trying to read the 12 chapters, you find the 12 chapters being condemned in the letter Rebuttal, which was then praised by Maximus, who is the patriarch of Antioch, Anatolius, who is now the patriarch of Constantinople, and the head of the Roman delegation, which is Pope Leo, the Bishop of Rome. Now, when we want to talk specifically about the person of Leo, he says abhorrent things. He says things in the tome like, the word performs what belongs to the word, the flesh performs what belongs to the flesh, the one performs brilliant miracles, the other sustains acts of violence. He also says, he whom Herod treacherously endeavors to destroy is like ourselves in our earliest stage, but he whom the Magi delight to worship on their knees is the Lord of all. He also says, using the concrete terms deus and homo, the deity is not changed by showing mercy, neither is the man devoured by the dignity received. Outside of the tome, Leo says things like, he joined himself to him and him to himself, assuming the whole man, so that each of the two natures inheres in the other. He also says that man who is the firstborn of the whole creation is one with the Son of God, and the Son of God is one with all of his saints in the same way. Now, if you want to look at Cyril and Chalcedon and see if they're reconcilable, see Cyril's words himself. All I'm going to predict in this debate, just like they did at Chalcedon, is they're going to read the Formula of Reunion and eisegete it. They're going to read the second letter to Nestorius, where it says the difference of the natures remains, but they're going to ignore the two letters to Sixensis, letter 40, which explains the difference is only a natural quality, and further on in his Scholia, where he says the difference of the natures is a difference of hypostasis. And that's time.
All right, so we're going to get started with the 5-minute rebuttals. I'm just going to wait a couple seconds to make my life a little easier. Of course, there's no second timer on this computer. I take 10 extra seconds, forgive me. All right, I'll get started. So, Agen and we'll have Daniel Kakish jumping in. I'm sure I take issue with the idea of what the Tome of Leo teaches. But the Tome of Leo, in its terminology, if we're not even going to just be charitable, forget the word charitable. If we're just going to be fair, where it says, in God is this, in man is that. You find that in Cyril, you find that in all sorts of fathers. But somehow it's only wrong when Chalcedonians use that terminology. It's just, it's an inconsistent critique that is leveled. But I'm going to pose to you that the Tome of Leo taught exactly what Cyril taught, because it taught that the difference in natures were in contemplation. Now, to quote the tome, it says, therefore, in consequence of this unity of person, which is to be understood, is the normal translation, but the word in Latin is intelligendum, which means discerned or thought of, all right? So therefore, in consequence of this unity of person, which is to be thought of in both natures, we read of the Son of Man also descending from heaven when the Son of God took flesh from the Virgin who bore him. So he actually parses the term to mean in contemplation. Now, we see this elsewhere in Leo's Sermon 76:2. He actually defines how he means the word intelligendum. He says, therefore, when we direct the eyes of our mind to understand, intelligendum, the dignity of the Holy Spirit, he goes on and on and on. There's also another treatise against the errors of Eutyches, where he verbatim quotes himself. Therefore, when we direct the eyes of our mind to understand, dignity of the Holy Spirit. And then in verse 8 of the same, he quotes the section verbatim from the tome using the term intelligendum. He understood it to mean in contemplation. But this is not something that agents want to concede, even though this is what the word means. We also find that the decree of Chalcedon itself actually uses that terminology in it, where in the creed, I'm just trying to scan it up right here. Where is it? Come on. See, when you get off script, he's young. He'd just go off memory. I have to actually, I actually have to find it in my script. Well, I'm not going to take more time. I look up the Greek word, and in the definition of Chalcedon, where it speaks of must be confessed to be in two natures. It's actually in the Greek word understood, and it's the same Greek word for like noetic function. And so it has to be contemplated in two natures would be a better translation. You could look up the Greek yourself. Now, in this reply, we were told that Eutyches affirmed double consubstantiality in Ephesus 2. That's a laughable interpretation. And it's laughable because when I brought this up to Subdeacon Daniel Kakish a few years ago, he laughed when we brought it up. So it is laughable. And just so people are aware, Eutyches was asked to affirm it. And he said, well, if you make me, I will affirm it. Does that sound honestly like an affirmation? Let's just be honest. No, it's not. He was rejecting double consubstantiality. And when Theodoret was deposed by Ephesus 2, non-canonically, may I add, that they deposed him literally like 2 sentences after him affirming double consubstantiality. Never in Ephesus 2 does that council affirm double consubstantiality. In fact, it includes passages about double consubstantiality and calls them heresies and impious things. And so it's an exact opposite of anyone who reads Ephesus 2, what Ephesus 2 actually said and did. Now, he claims that condemning Nestorius is not a litmus test of orthodoxy. I mean, just read sessions 8, 9, and 10 of Chalcedon yourself. That's clearly the intent. If you want to say, well, it wasn't good enough, okay, they were imprudent or whatever, but that clearly was their intent, okay? We're going to have some debate over what does contemplation mean in Cyril. So I'm just going to quote Cyril on how we ought to understand what is meant by contemplation, because here's what it doesn't mean. It doesn't mean that it's something totally theoretical, right? That there aren't two actual separate natures. It means that there is only one subject, and we can only see the differences in that subject within the mind because they cannot be separated.
Can I pause you here? I'm not gonna respond.
Well, no.
Wait,
this is okay. Time 5:40. All right, so I'll just end reading this from Cyril, and I'll just go that. Thank you for bringing that up. I lost track of time. And so Cyril says that Theodoret, he's criticized Theodoret, does not allow him, a human, to be severed asunder, although the contemplation on him, on the human being, does not regard severance and separation as unacceptable. As regards knowing, I mean, that the soul is different by nature and the flesh is different according to its own nature. So again, it's about subject. His understanding of contemplation allows for the natures to be real, concretely different. Okay, and I'm sorry if I took a second too long or something. My apologies. All right, so should we give Subdeacon Daniel Kakish the rebuttal, or you want to see that the Agen Subdeacon? This is where you have to say hi to everyone.
Hello. Hi, everybody. Craig, thank you. I don't know, Agen, if you want us to like both.
I'll try and speed run. Speed run his.
I just have a sentence to say at the end. Go for it.
Okay. No
All
worries.
right, so let's go.
I'll start the time when I start talking. Okay. So in his opening statement, he mentioned how Ephesus talks about preserving the Godhead in the flesh. This comes from St. Ambrose of Milan's De Fide, 2.9.77. If you actually read De Fide, Ambrose says that this preserving is because there's a twofold nature. This is a statement which you find in Aurelius Prudentius Clemens, which basically signifies a single nature. As for the speaking in both part, according to Cyril, in the flesh is simply equivalent to according to the flesh, and he says this in the defense of the 12 anathemas against the Bishop of Orient, and in the divinity is equivalent to according to the divinity. Now, you said in the opening statement, Nestorius' condemnation is a test of orthodoxy, but even Nestorius condemns himself in his Bazaar and in a bunch of his other works. He says, let Nestorius be anathematized. And as I mentioned, Cyril said, you can hate Nestorius, but if you praise Theodore, you're worse. He doesn't say you're just as Nestorian. He says you're worse, which is what we find Pascasinus doing, Maximus doing, Anatolius doing when they accept the letter of Rebuttal as orthodox, which explicitly says that Theodore was a blessed teacher and calls Cyril Apollinarian and says Cyril taught impiety. As for the two essences thing, the two letters to six senses don't just condemn the statement two natures after the union indivisibly. It also condemns the statement of treating the human nature as an essence which subsists. And I quote, and this is going to be off memory, he says, if our human nature, that is our essence, is not enduring, how can he be called a man? And then Cyril says, with the same Greek word for enduring and subsisting, this objection is yet another attack on those who say there's one incarnate nature of the Son. They want to show that the idea is foolish, so they keep on arguing at every case that two natures subsist. As for your claim that Dioscorus was not canonically deposed, That is not the topic of the debate, but I'll still respond out of my generosity. You're appealing to Apostolic Canon 74, which mentions that there was a thrice summons, but Dioscorus specifically trapped Eusebius of Dorelium, who tried to bring out the summons, by making Eusebius say, I personally am the one summoning you. In Apostolic Canon 75, which is the canon after it, it says a heretic cannot be a witness against the bishop, and Eusebius of Dorelium was personally deposed at Ephesus 449, and you have no reason to annul Ephesus 449. All you have is Pascasinus saying in session 10, when it comes to Ebos and the reading of Beirutis, when they want to compare Ebos's deposition with Ephesus 2, they say explicitly you cannot mention Ephesus 2. Why? Oh, because Leo. And because of violence. That's the collegial answer. But violence, they admit to lying about it when Dioscorus says, out of your own mouth you will be justified, out of your own mouth you will be condemned. And then explicitly, you have them saying, we all sin, we all beg forgiveness. The glorious official said, but you claimed earlier there was violence. We all sinned, we all beg forgiveness. That's their words. Now, you mentioned that this is an ethnic schism, but for some reason, in 475, we have 500 to 700 bishops, because almost the entirety of the East reverted to Miaphysitism, condemning the tome and condemning Leo. Now, your 4 ways of proving this thesis of this debate is defining Nestorianism, talking about what Chalcedon affirmed, what Cyril taught, and the response from the Oriental Orthodox was inconsistent. Well, number 1, you said Nestorius taught that the person was only nominally one and he had 2 separate people, but Nestorius never says that. You actually cited Richard Price's minutes, which has person in parentheses. Please, next time in your opening, mention that it's in parentheses, because Nestorius doesn't use that word. As for you saying Nestorius taught adoptionism by that one quote you used, Leo says unequivocally much, much worse. He says verbatim, because the word and flesh constitute a single person, the one taken does not become separated from the one taken. And God exalted him and gave him the name that is above every name. The exaltation of the assumed man is commended. The creature is united to its creator in Sermon 63. Nothing human to that assuming, nothing was lacking. And then in Sermon 74, he says there's a man assumed, and he explicitly says that the substance which is from the mother is the saved. He even says that God inhabited the one being born in one of his sermons. So Leo, the criteria you're using to say that Nestorius is Nestorian, Leo says it verbatim and worse. Now, you said that we cannot show Leo doing this. I did show that. Now, you said Chalcedon taught one and the same in 2 natures, in one person and one hypostasis. Well, guess what? In fragment 308, Nestorius cites the exact same creed and says he agrees with it. And even if you say Nestorius died before then, he was invited to Chalcedon, and Theodoret cited Nestorius to prove the Chalcedonian definition in his letter to John of Aega. And he says that hypostasis here meant a collection of many individuals in a mutual proximity. Continuing. To go on further than that, you said in the second letter to Sexensis, it talks about he didn't suffer in his own nature, but rather in his earthly nature. That is him citing Sexensis and saying this is in thought alone, and then saying after the union, you cannot say 2 natures after the union. In the Glapher on the Pentateuch, which you cited, I wish you would have shown the Greek. The Greek says these being in fact, indeed, in 2 natures separated. He says the word separated and then says it's a theoria in the same exact Glapher. He uses the Greek word theoria and the Greek word logos. So you're proving to me the only way you can have in 2 is if it's a separation. We as Oriental Orthodox affirm a conceptual separation. You affirm the duality is in reality and after the union. So the Glapher on the Pentateuch refutes you, because he also says that the other human nature, counted with the divine nature that you're conceiving in the mind, he says it's the heavenly man. Do you believe there's a heavenly man after the union? No. Now, if you keep reading, you said the nature remains in all its natural characteristics. He says the hypostasis remains in its natural characteristics, the 2 in plural. Does that mean there's 2 hypostases? No. You mentioned the nature of man having the difference belonging still in the second letter to Sexensis, where he says the term one is appropriate.
Right,
not just
I think you're going to need to get your sentence in now.
Go ahead, Subdeacon.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you said it was ethnic. I was just curious as to what the ethnicities are. As far as I know, this like the Syriac non-Chalcedonians didn't have Syriac patriarchs until after Severus. All the non-Chalcedonian patriarchs of Antioch were Greeks, and ironically, the Chalcedonian parallel had the Syriac fellows. So that was one of the points. I don't know what the ethnicities are. That would be, you said ethnic reasons. And the other point was, you said Eutyches was forced to say Christ is consubstantial, so it doesn't count if it was forced. Theodoret was forced to anathematize Nestorius. Does that not count either? That was all I wanted to say.
All right, so we're going to start our 15-minute cross-exams. People are like, oh, there's so much more we can unpack here. Yes, but we're all going to sleep tonight. The nature of any debate is there'll be good points made, and they are not always addressed. And I'm just making sure, good, I'm not on mute, so I'm actually speaking to people. So what we're going to do is 15 minutes of a cross-exam. Who should we start? Should you guys ask the questions first, or you want me to ask the questions first?
I think it's fair you go because we just spoke for a bit.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will start the questions first, and we'll start right now. On what textual basis, and only just one person answer for each question, so we can keep it moving, do you infer that neither Chalcedon or Leo affirm two natures in thought or theory when the texts make explicit reference to this?
Easy answer. The Council of Ephesus. So your question is on what textual basis they didn't. I'll grant it to you because St. Theodotus, cited in Homily 1 at the Council of Ephesus, says, "But I distinguish by rationalization only," he says. "Surely then you also undo the union with the same rationalization. For by what you might separate one from the other, by this you also sever the combination. Why do you split the saving dispensation, thinking of two and canceling the union?" So Theodotus condemns using theoria as an excuse for the statement two natures after the union, because at the end of Homily 1, he says there were not two things nor two natures. The Greek is oide diophysis.
Okay, we have this question. Are you aware that Antioch 269 speaks of an essential union in Christ?
Yes, it uses the Greek word ousiomeni. The Latin preserved in Peter the Deacon uses the Latin word substantia, and it says, cited in Contra Impious Grammarian and Severus, the two become one, ousiomeni, which is why homoousios was condemned in 268, because Paul of Samosata was a modalist monarchian. So ousia here is being used in the Aristotelian primary ousia sense, and it proves that the Synod of Antioch 268 is miaphysite.
All right, so what terminology did Cyril in Ephesus employ in place of essential union concept?
He did use the same exact word ousiomeni in his letter to Augustus and
But we said in
twins.
Ephesus. So in Ephesus, what terminologies are used?
He uses the word henosis kataphysian in the third letter to Nestorius. So there's katausia in Synod of Antioch, there's kataphysis in Synod of Ephesus.
And so let's speak English for the people. Are we speaking of the hypostatic union and natural union?
Yes, and my argument is that Synod of Antioch uses ousia in this way that Ephesus uses physis.
I agree. Now, are you aware that Nicaea's usage of the term same essence differed from how Antioch 269 used the term?
Repeat that question.
Are you aware that Nicaea's usage of the term homoousios differed from how Antioch 269 understood the term?
Like I said, homoousios was condemned at 268. Homoousios was accepted at 325. At 268, it was used for modalism, so primary ousia. In 325, it was used for common ousia, what's shared.
All right. So, what controversy did the term homoousia lead to after Nicaea?
I'm not familiar. Are you talking about maybe like the Eusebian schism and the semi-Arians?
Oh yeah, the semi-Arians. So like, what was St. Athanasius' policy towards the moderate semi-Arians led by St. Basil of Ancyra, who espoused homoion, that Christ's essence was in every way alike?
Right. So the semi-Arians wanted to say homoiousios, whereas the pro-Nicenes wanted to say homoousios. There's a good parallel between here and Chalcedon, but are you just asking me if I'm aware of this use?
Well, so what was the policy though, right? They used different theological vocabularies. What was St. Athanasius' policy towards the people that wouldn't say of the same essence? They said in a very like essence.
According to Jerome, Athanasius was pretty against homoiousios. He was strict on homoousios.
Are you aware that in De Synodas, St. Athanasius said, those, however, who accept everything else that was defined in Nicaea and a doubt only about the coessential must not be treated as enemies, nor do we here attack them as maniacs, nor as opponents to fathers, but we discuss the matter with them as brothers with brothers who mean what we mean and dispute only about the word?
In regards to the term homoousios or homoiousios?
Homoion.
He tries to affirm homoiousios. I don't think that's an accurate reading of that text.
Are you aware that most people citing this text would take the exact opposite interpretation you just take?
Not aware of that, no.
Okay.
But
So
what's
are you aware
the
that the
relevance if you're gonna
Cappadocians
tie it in?
use the term, are you aware that the Cappadocians use the term hypostasis different than Nicaea's creed, which banned speaking of the persons as different hypostases because it had no particular hypostasis doctrine?
Yeah, the Cappadocians used hypostases in a more peculiar individual way than a common way, like we see in the original draft of Nicaea.
Okay, and is there a reason why they totally contradicted the plain demand of Nicaea at the end of the creed and expounded hypostasis as they did?
I wouldn't say it's a contradiction. Hypo means under, stasis means standing. In the Latin, you'll have sub meaning under, stantia meaning standing. And for centuries prior to Christianity, substantia is used either in the individual sense or the common sense. So
I'm
they're
not-
using
I'm
hypostasis
saying
in the
though,
individual sense.
why did they use the term differently than Nicaea?
Well, because also during Athanasius' time, if you read his letter, his tome to the Antiochians, he mentions there's people affirming 3 hypostases, people affirming 1 hypostasis. They're both saying the same thing.
Now, wouldn't you say Cyril said wouldn't you say Cyril showed flexibility in theological terminology, provided it taught the correct concept in his positive glosses of the Antiochians and their use of the 2 natures after the union?
Can you repeat that? Like, I promise I'm not trying to waste time if that's what it looks
Wouldn't
like.
you say Cyril showed flexibility in theological terminology, provided it taught the correct concept in his positive glosses on the Antiochians and their use of the term 2 natures?
Actually, no. In the letter of John of Antioch in the countersyn of 431, the Latin reads dueram vero naturarum. This was offered to Cyril, and he talks about this in letter 40. He says that Paul of Emesa tried to bring forward a document. I didn't accept it. And then he only accepted the formula of reunion when it said from 2 natures, which Nestorius rejected, and we accept. And then letter 44, he says they affirm 1 nature like me, but they use obscure sayings.
And my point is, or my question is, did he show theological or rather terminological flexibility in allowing those obscure sayings, provided they conceptually taught the same thing?
Only if it's from 2, yes, if it's from 2 natures.
Well, then how can you accept Proclus as a saint when he verbatim used Chalcedonian language in 2 natures after the union?
You're citing Homily 24, which is in Syriac. It was published by a Syriac scholar. J.P. Migny cited it in his Patrologia Latina, and then it includes the into natures part. I asked my friends asked 3 separate scholars. One is RC, 2 are Syriac. They have the Syriac. It only says as 2 natures. In 2 natures after the union is not in the original Syriac. It's certainly only added in the Latin. And then it's translated into Greek. I know what book you're referring to.
Yes, from
And one more thing to add.
Constance. Now,
One more thing to add. Can I add, or you're welcome to interrupt because this is your time.
yeah.
But
So I ask, are you aware that there's other nativity homilies that also say the 2 natures are 1 person? It's the Coptic homily, homily 23.
It's Syriac. Homily 23 says there's 1 nature in the original manuscript. I have the footnote from J.P. Migny who'll confirm this.
I'm talking about the Coptic homily. I've seen the Coptic because it's interlinear. You could Google it, and it says that the 2 natures are 1 person. Are you aware of that?
Homily, if you're talking about homily 23, are you talking about homily 23?
Again, homily 23, but it might be numbered differently in the Coptic, which is why I'm citing the Coptic.
J.P. Migny publishes homily 23 and homily 24. Both are in Syriac. Homily 23 says 1 kiana. It says 1 nature. And then he changes it to 1 person in the Latin because he thought a monophysite scribe corrupted it, but there's no evidence for that.
Now, in the 24th homily, which says he is our nature since he's endowed with the same humanity apart from sin, how would you interpret this?
It's fine. Homily 24, if I grant the original Syriac, it only says we understand Christ as 2 natures. I'd understand that the same with the formula of reunion. If you mean that a union came from 2 natures, you can speak of 2 natures, which Cyril says in letter 44, that he agrees with Nestorius on the 2 natures part. They differ on the union because there's 1 nature after the union, which Proclus already admits in the homily before.
Meant here, though.
Right, I'm making a comparison. Homily 23 says 1 nature.
In the Ethiopic homily, that's preserved a different nativity homily because there's Christmas every year. You preach different homilies. It says, in his divine nature, he had no mother, and in his fleshly nature, he had no father on the earth. Wouldn't you say this is also Diophysite vocabulary?
No, because Cyril says in his humanity means according to the humanity, in his divinity means according to divinity. In 2 natures at Chalcedon means 2 natures after the union, each one properly working.
But the Ethiopian homily says in his fleshly nature, not just in his flesh. So wouldn't you
It's the same
say I'm sorry? So
Same
you so
thing.
you
Cyril
would
says
so
in his
you would
human
permit
nature
the
and his
use
divine
so
nature when
you
he's
permit
talking
the
about
use
different
of the
accordance.
term. So you would permit the use of the term human nature.
If you say in his human nature, as in according to his human nature, that's orthodox. Severus says it, Dioscorus says it, everyone says it.
Okay, so do you accept the term two natures at the union as long as we take the difference of the natures in a theoretical manner, being that we have that in the text from Proclus?
No, because it's not in the text from Proclus,
It says after the union.
which is only attached in the Latin and then translated in Constance's book as Greek. The Syriac doesn't have it.
I will grant until someone can get to the bottom of that Syriac. Now, being that you differ, I'm going to go to my next question. Why did the early non-Chalcedonian polemicists not accuse the Chalcedonians of rejecting the theoretical differentiation of the natures?
Why didn't they accuse them of rejecting the theoretical distinction of natures?
Yes.
The
I
topic
mean, that
was
seems
brought
to be
up.
the meat of the issue.
The topic was brought up by our saints by the time of 553. They were basically explaining the theoretical distinction of Justinian, and it's mentioned in Constantinople too, is not what the Ephesian fathers had in mind, which is why I cited Theodotus's homily 1, where he says you can't appeal to rationalization if you're a Diophysite.
If the non-Chalcedonian schism was actually doctrinal, why didn't they make peace with the church when Council II dogmatized that in two natures is in theory and canonized Cyril's third letter, especially when Egypt did not have a non-Chalcedonian line of bishops yet?
Same answer. Theodotus says at Ephesus in homily 1, but I distinguish by rationalization only, he says, surely then you also undo the union. So appealing to theoria to justify two natures is condemned by Ephesus 431.
Are you aware that Theodotus in the same homily asked how God became a slave, remaining what he was and becoming what he was not, by giving a list of miracles where he says explicitly the nature of both remains when, like, for example, one thing like fire became dew in the midst of fire, like the three youths. So to quote him, the nature of both divine and human remains. So are you aware what you keep quoting is refuted by what he says later in the same homily?
Can I ask a clarifying question?
You could ask clarifying questions during your line of questioning, sure.
Are you aware that the same homily says oide diophysis?
You would have to translate, I speak English.
Nor
Now,
two natures.
That being said, and I want to check your time here, so I don't want to go over time. Did Chalcedon accept Ephesus?
It tried to.
All right. What were the two canonical letters of Cyril which were approved and published, the quote, this I'm quoting Chalcedon, at the First Council of Ephesus?
You're talking about, I know the exact quote you're talking about. He says they're published at Ephesus, but according to Price, and when you read sessions 2 and session 5, when they cite the same exact synodical letters, they're talking about second letter to Nestorius and the formula of reunion. So that first guy you're citing was wrong according to the same council. He was trying to talk about the formula of reunion, but he thought it was published at Ephesus. I can give you the quote you're referencing.
So what you're saying, I know what Price says. So you're inferring against what it explicitly says that the two canonical letters of Cyril were approved and published at the First Council of Ephesus weren't the actual ones that weren't, I'm asking the question, weren't the actual ones that actually were published at Ephesus, again, at Ephesus, but rather we are to infer that this is the letter of John at Antioch and the second letter.
It's not an inference. That's what the council says. When they literally say, we're going to cite the synodical
letter.
letters.
Where does it say it?
You want me to get the verbatim quote?
Yes.
Okay, 1 second. You'll take me a time because I didn't put it in my PDF.
All right.
I don't want to waste your time.
Maybe you can include that in your closing because it doesn't say it.
Okay.
Did Chalcedon reject Cyril's third letter?
Through the letter Vibas, yes.
Through the letter of Vibas. The letter of Vibas was rejected during the 9th and 10th sessions of Chalcedon. Is that not so?
That's completely wrong. The letter Vibas was accepted, according to Maximus, who says, from the transcript from his adversary, we declare his reading to be orthodox.
The transcript from his adversary was what he had as his petition from his clergy. Is that not so?
Absolutely not, because they're citing Beirutis. Beirutis only mentions the testimonial from the Council of Antioch.
What was the last letter? What was the last letter read during session 10?
2 of them were read. One was from Ibas.
What was the last? The question was, what was the last letter read during session 10 that stopped the argument? What was the last letter?
I'm answering. There's 2 things that are happening in session 10: the reading of Beirutis, and then the
you're
normal
not
reading
answering
of
the question. You're absolutely answering the question.
I am.
That being said, Who rejected the reading of the third letter of Cyril during Chalcedon?
It was ignored. There was no form
How
of
was it
condemnation.
ignored? Do you remember? What interrupted it?
Basically, what
The
happened was
people,
this.
wasn't it the people, the bishops
I guess you're
exclaiming,
answering.
restore the fathers of Ephesus too? Is that what interrupted the letter?
I think I'm the one answering the questions.
Well,
If you want to answer your question,
is that
I
what interrupted
don't
the
know why
letter?
you're doing that.
What is the next thing? Let's read the letter. What's the next thing that was said?
Are you asking me a question?
Yeah, what's the next thing that was
I'd love
said?
to answer. I'd love to answer.
What's the next
What
thing that was said?
happens was Atticus says we should read the 12 anathemas, and then the legates directly say in the next paragraph, we're going to have a rehearing 5 days from now, and then mention a private meeting at Anatolius's place. That's what happens.
What was said that interrupted the reading of the minutes?
What minutes?
The reading of the third letter to Nestorius. It was the
He said
restoration
he said
of
we
the
want to
fathers
read
of
it.
the council.
He said we should read it. He got ignored, and then they said we're going to have a rehearing in 5 days. This is in session. This is in session 2.
Wasn't that said in response to the people that were exclaiming to restore the fathers of Ephesus too, so that way they could take part in the evaluation of the letter.
When they said restore discourse, is that what you're mentioning? That's a little bit later down.
The other fathers, they say the fathers.
That's a little bit later down still. What happens is,
No,
I told you the paragraphs, and I can pull it up.
Now, I'll ask
one
last question. I think we are. I'll ask one last question.
I think it's been over 15, but sure.
Are you aware that Leo's supposition was that the flesh did partake the conceiver's nature, or in other words, a positive affirmation of consubstantiality with mankind?
And then can I ask a clarifying if this is going to be in reference to the letter of the Egyptian monks from Dioscorus?
I was talking about Saint Leo, so I don't see the connection between the two. I'm saying, are you aware that that was Leo's supposition in the tome, that he was positively affirming the double consubstantiality with mankind?
I'll answer on a conditional. If you're going to mention right after my answer, the letter of Dioscorus to the monks in Alexandria, he never says the word Chalcedonian. You actually interpolated that in your article. I checked. So yes, I can grant that Leo taught a double consubstantiality. I don't grant you're reading that Dioscorus didn't think that.
Oh, well, my closing, I will address that. Right, it's your turn and Subdeacon Daniel's turn. This is becoming just an Agen debate, but be that as it may, their team could pick whoever they want. And so that being said, I think, Agen, you're a little more tech savvy than me. I'm writing a time down, but I'm trusting that you'll get the 15 minutes and maybe a few extra seconds, so you could get started.
Okay. My first question. Let me ask one, and I'll give you one, Subdeacon.
No, I don't have one. I just wanted to say I love you guys, Craig. Well, I was gonna tell you something. It slipped my mind. Agen, take the first. How much time we have? Whatever you want. The first session, the first part of it, whatever. I just have to do a quick work call, and then I'm gonna come back. Okay.
All right. Okay, I'll start my timer now. My first question is the following. Let me see where my questions I have them saved. Okay, here we go. What did the Patriarch of Antioch mean by the reading of the transcript of the letter produced by his adversary?
He meant the reading of the, if you go later in the minutes of Veritas, was the, what's it called? The petition of the clergy of Ebus that were saying that he was Orthodox.
That petition is after the reading of Beirutis. Did you know that?
That petition was continually cited during that council to be read, and was read during that council.
The testimonial that was read was from the Council of Antioch.
The idea was that the adversary was withholding from the minutes the reading of this letter that was read during that council.
But it wasn't. The testimonial from the Council of Antioch was actually, if you read the testimonial from the clergy of Edessa, was read after the letter he bossed in Chalcedon, not at Beirutis. Are you aware of that?
I'm going to just say no for the moment, because I might be getting the two cities confused. But in the reading during session 10, the last thing read is the petition, and the the implication is that petition was during the council that was being read immediately beforehand, and that the adversary was not allowing that portion of the council to be read.
Do you have the citation that the
Yes,
testimonial was read at Beirut?
yes,
Because
I
I've read
do.
the entire minutes.
Petition. 1 second. I'll have to look it up for you. I could get to you after the show, but if I see it before then, if you let me interrupt, sure, I'll get you the citation.
Okay, it's fine. I'll just move on to my next question. My statement on that would just be that's wrong. Here's my next question. Was the clergy of Edessa, however, cited by his adversaries?
Repeat that the clergy of Edessa is cited by his adversaries? What do you mean by that?
Was the testimonial from the clergy of Edessa cited by Ibas's adversaries?
There is 2 petitions, right? We're talking about another petition. Are we talking about another? Are we talking about the? We're talking about the petition of his clergy that justified his orthodoxy, right?
There's 2 of them. One was briefly mentioned in the Beirutist minutes, which was mentioned, it was not read, which is from the Council of Antioch. The other one was read after his opponents at Chalcedon. So to repeat my question was the clergy of Edessa, the letter of the clergy of Edessa, cited by his adversaries?
Yeah, I don't remember right now. I don't remember.
It wasn't. The only thing cited by his adversaries was the letter to Mary the Persian.
But
Okay.
why? I just don't see why they would cite a letter where people are against him, where they are justifying his orthodoxy. So he read it out during the council to defend himself, but I don't see why his enemies would cite that. Oh, he read this petition defending himself. I just don't understand the question here.
It's very easy. It's because Chalcedon is in Cyrillian. That's why. If that's the inference that you don't understand. But okay, next question.
No, I don't. Those things don't connect, at least bit. But okay.
Why does Chalcedon say restore the orthodox teacher in regards to Theodoret in the authentic minutes?
Well, what session? Because I have to know the context.
Session 8.
In session 8. If I remember the logic in session 8, it's that he now accepts Cyril, and that he said he no longer thinks of Cyril as he did beforehand. And it's brought up against Theodoret, if I remember right, that, well, you wrote these things, after everything was resolved anyway. And Theodoret just distanced himself from it and says, well, it was wrong for me to do, pretty much. I know these are very big paraphrases, but these councils there's a lot behind my head. There's a lot to memorize.
Okay.
No, it's what happens. Someone can read session 8 and they'll get that's exactly the gist of it.
Okay. So restore the Orthodox one to the church. He's Orthodox because he agrees with Cyril?
That's the logic that they're expounding, yes.
Okay, then why does Justinian verbatim say Theodoret was not accepted as a teacher?
He might be working off a different rendering or manuscript for some other polemical need. I'm not sure.
Okay, so Constantinople II is relying on corrupt minutes?
This is a larger question, which would be what we have from some of these councils, which they potentially, I'm not going to dig my feet in the dirt on this one, but they potentially will cite forgeries. And I know you go by all the Apollinaриan forgeries are real, but there's centuries of precedent and lots of scholarship says no. Now, again, I actually have done scholarship and text criticism, so I'm not going to say you're absolutely wrong. It's just you need more evidence.
Okay.
You need evidence to prove such a thing.
For the sake of time, why weren't the 12 anathemas read?
During the Council of Chalcedon.
At session 2, when he asked for it,
at session 2, because it was interrupted by the people that wanted the restoration of the fathers at Ephesus 2. And so they, in order to get those people involved, they were to table it for 5 days. So that way the sessions in the middle would be about dealing with who's going to be deposed and who's going to be restored.
The restore the Orthodox ones is not mentioned in between the asking for the 12 anathemas and between the we'll meet in 5 days. It's not there in the minutes. Next question.
How about you read it for us then?
Next question. I have time. Next question.
Oh, okay. Well, people can read it themselves.
I could show it to you after, like you said. Okay. Why was comparing the tome to Cyril done privately?
This was the same time, if I remember right. There were also there was also a private session, rather, when they were trying to devise a creed. And we do know during this private session, some sort of creed was devised anyway, as you refer to, with the of two natures instead of the in two natures. And so why was it done? It was in order to avoid argument. For example, with the actual Creed of Chalcedon, 15 of the 19 people that made it were attendees of Ephesus 2 and very ardent Cyrillians. So the idea would be to try to get the people that are very much in favor of one nature.
My question isn't why was it done?
They get them on board because to avoid chaos.
That's not my question. I'd like to interrupt during my time.
I'll try to ask questions shorter.
I'd like to interrupt
to avoid chaos. Read session 2 and session 5.
This is my time.
Read
I'm
session 2.
Interrupt.
All right, I'm answering your question. Read session 2.
Let me ask you. Let me qualify.
Read session 2.
Okay.
Read session 5. They keep interrupting each other. So of course they're going to try. Let's try to table this and get something we can all agree on.
Okay. So it's private because they're going to interrupt each other.
Yes.
Okay. Next question. Why did the legates specifically say Dioscorus says from to, Leo says to? Who do you agree with? And then had the Creed of Chalcedon be rewritten to say into instead of from to?
I have a fun answer for that one, and that was to stick it to Dioscorus. It wasn't for a theological reason. It was to force him to be humiliated if he were to accept Chalcedon's doctrine.
So the statement from Cyril and the statement from the Formula of Reunion was rejected in order to stick it to Dioscorus?
It was to make it so, because he was already deposed, that he wouldn't have a comeback, because if he would have a comeback, they could lose the communion of Leo.
Right, so because he's Cyrillian.
I wrote a whole article for this. No, that's not why. It's called The Political Subterfuge of Chalcedon. It gets to all sorts of details about this. But yes, there's a political subterfuge.
Do you understand the epistemic issue when the statement from to is specifically shown as being belonging to Dioscorus, even though it's the criteria of reunion in the formula and it's being rejected? Do you understand the issue there, or do you not see it?
No, because the Cyrillians understood that the term in human nature, in divine nature, is right in the second letter of Sixensis. They understood that the terminology, there's nothing wrong with it. They just knew where Dioscorus specifically, and I would say imprudently, was sticking his ground, and they used that as.
Then why did the legate say? But why did the legate say? But Leo says to instead of from to. Why is there making a contrast? Why is there a contrasting statement? But Leo says to. If Leo would have agreed with that,
because
why does Leo? Let me qualify.
Clarify the question.
Over that. Why does Leo, on top of that, say the impiety of saying that he was from two natures is only equaled by the iniquity of asserting there was but one nature in him after the word became flesh?
Actually, I remembered the answer to this because I thought about it, but it's skipping my mind at the moment. So I will say the way Leo was reading, because he was concerned that from two natures was something that made it sound an historian itself, the way he was understanding it. When you read the tome, that's how he describes it in the last paragraph when he talks about Eutyches. And so just think about it. What Cyril means from two natures is that there's human essence and there's divine essence, and from the Theotokos, God assumes the human nature. Now from Leo, he's not thinking in those terms. So when he's not
sees thinking in Cyrillian terms, right?
He's not understanding the theological vocabulary there.
Right, because he's not understanding Cyrillianism. That's
why, again, this debate is conceptually.
You just granted me the debate.
No, I didn't. It's why it's conceptually Cyrillian, not whether they use identical terminology, which they definitely did not.
Okay, all right. Let me ask another question. Why does Cyril verbatim reject the statement two natures after the union, even if you say it's indivisible?
Why does Cyril? I'll just have to say I'd have to read in more context.
I'll give you the context from memory. He says word for word, this objection is yet another attack on those who say there is one incarnate nature of the Son. They want to show that the idea is foolish, so they keep on arguing at every turn that two natures subsist. They have forgotten, however, that it is only those things which are usually distinguished at more than an only theoretical level, which split apart from one another in differentiated separateness and radical distinction. Let us once more take the example of an ordinary man. We recognize two natures in him, for there is one nature of the soul, another of the body, but we divide them only at a theoretical level. Rather, we accept the distinction as only in our mental intuitions, and we do not set the natures apart, nor do we grant that they have a radical separateness. This is why the two are no longer two, but through both the one living creature is rendered complete. That's the context off memory. You're welcome to go see if I cited it word for word.
I'll say
why did Cyril reject two natures after the union?
from what you said, it was to disallow for a Nestorian interpretation of two-nature terminology.
Then why did he say they were already trying to distance from Nestorius by saying there's inseparability in the last paragraph of the letter?
It sounds like he's accusing them of just being disingenuous, that they're Nestorian, but that they're saying they're not Nestorian, but they are.
Hence the Chalcedonians. Bingo. Thank you. Next question.
That's not a question. That's
my
ridiculous.
next question is, why did 500 bishops gathered at Nicaea, because that's where Chalcedon was originally going to be, have to move either to Chalcedon, where the emperor could be, or Italy, where the Pope of Rome could be? Why did they need one of those?
Well, if I remember right, when I went to Chalcedon, there was some sort of invasion at the time. Rome was always Marcion didn't want it in Rome. Leo kept demanding and begging, actually, in at least 2 letters, that it be in Rome, and Marcion pretty much told him no. It was a threat in order to get the people in Chalcedon to come to an agreement. So there's never seriously going to be a council bankrolled by the Eastern Emperor where the Western Rome Emperor resided. That's crazy.
Well, specifically, we have correspondence where they say we want it at Chalcedon so the emperor can be there physically. Why do they want the emperor there physically?
Again, if I remember, this history of the error, I'm remembering from the introduction from Price and Gaddis. It's because there was some sort of military issue at the time from, I think, barbarians or someone invading.
Okay.
I know that the Huns fairly recently sacked Rome, so it might be the Huns and the Balkans at this period.
Next question. During that period in session 5, where they said, to remind the viewers, where they originally had the creed say from 2 natures, and then the legates say change it to in 2 natures, because Dioscorus says from 2, Leo says 2. Why did the bishops say, return to Italy, you Romans? And then why did they get scared when the legates threatened to move the council to Italy?
Because they wouldn't have a say anymore.
Bingo. They wouldn't have a say in Rome. They wouldn't have a say at Chalcedon because both have people who are imperial powers. One would be the emperor. One would be the actual ecclesiastical power where they would have no control, which would have been Leo of Rome, who would have disagreed with the Alexandrian bishops. That's another concession. Next question.
Not really.
Why did Cyril say?
Again, if you have less of a say, that's just a natural thing. I don't where you import.
Why would they have less of a say if they agree with Leo?
Because less of them would make it there. That's true of all the councils. That's why there's less Western bishops in Chalcedon. You want to go where you have as many people on your side.
Okay. Next question. Why does Cyril say there is not 2 in any way?
Again, I need more context, but I don't think we have the time for that context, sadly.
Okay, yeah, there's a minute left. I would say my last question would be a very in-depth hypothetical conditional, granting this conditional. Granted that, because we didn't have the time to look into the context, granted that the adversaries of Ibas never cited his testimonial, and Maximus says Ibas is orthodox on account of what's cited by his adversaries, would this not be demonstrable proof that they accepted the letter of Ibas Tamari?
You get more time. Could you repeat the question? I don't get it.
So basically on this conditional, let's assume that the Beirutis minutes never cited the testimonial. Neither did the Theodore guy. I don't know if I'm getting his name right. Something Theo. The guy at Chalcedon who was citing Beirutis. Theophilus, right. Granted that he didn't cite any testimonial of Ibas. The only thing he would have cited is the letter of Ibas Tamari. Then wouldn't that be absolute proof that Maximus accepted the letter of Ibas because he says we accept what's cited by his adversary?
My point was that the proceedings of that council contained the letter of the Edessene clergy. And so...
Look at this hypothetical. I know you think that, because we didn't have time to go into the context. Hypothetically, if Beirutis doesn't have
I'd love to have a whole debate just in that one issue, and we could get into the real nitty-gritty on it. But all right, I'll grant you the hypothetical.
So granting the hypothetical that there was no testimonial cited from the enemy of Ibas, when Maximus says that he accepts what's cited by the enemies of Ibas, would that not be proof he accepted the letter Tamari?
No, it's, again, the actual, even grammatically, the argument that the letter of Ibas written to Tamari was affirmed by him during the session when he's consistently trying to avoid it, embarrassingly so, by the way. And they're making every justification that he's not accepting it, and he wants to read this Edessene clergy petition. I just don't think it's defensible. It's based on a misreading of what the Roman legate and the Antiochian
I'm asking about Maximus
and what the Antiochian patriarch says. And looked at grammatically, it's just not defensible.
Craig,
And I would debate anyone on that.
Can you repeat my question, Craig? Do you remember my question?
Well, we're out of time, so we're not gonna.
All right. Saved by the Bell. All right,
There we
can move
go.
into closing.
Saved by, I didn't really like that show back in the day. It was so popular in the early 90s.
I loved it, Craig.
I'm too young to know.
I was a huge Zach Morris fan.
I don't know. I don't like any of that. I thought it was a kind of boring show. Oh my gosh. So anyway, we have 5 minutes closing. Subdeacon, what's fair? Who closes first? Me or your agent? Are you getting in this at all, Subdeacon? I mean, you are on the thumbnail.
I'm sorry, Craig. I don't know.
It's my fault.
crazy
It's my
stuff.
fault. I've been talking a lot. I think maybe we should
it's
have
fine.
expanded the time.
I had an emergency doctor appointment.
Well, God willing, everything's
Anyway,
okay. Well, they're saying you've won the debate. You've won the debate. So sometimes not saying anything is the best policy. There you go.
I don't.
So
whatever you want. It's your show, bro. You want to go first? You want us to go? Whatever you want.
What's fair, agent? I'll do what you say.
I'll do what you say. It's your show.
I don't know. I don't know what the debate rules are. I always ask other people.
Typically, I think you would go. Typically.
Okay, so then I'll go first. Let me just write the time down, and we will begin. All right. Now, tonight, I think a lot of the audience would have gotten lost once it hit the time of the rebuttals and a lot of the question and answers. And I think a lot of the audience would have got lost because this is actually a bigger, larger problem of apologetics. And it's something that I actually tried to deliberately avoid during this debate. Is I come with my quote mine, the other person comes with their quote mine, and they say, well, Cyril said this here, and then, well, Cyril said that there. Believe me, I have a whole list of diathlete statements said by Cyril, for example, and other fathers, just in case the issue came up, which it didn't. But it's that being said, that if all people ever do is hear quotes and they don't hear context or they don't hear what's happening on the larger level, it's really hard to understand what's going on. And I think that in this case, what comes out is what is the more cogent explanation of what happened in history? All right. What is the more cogent explanation of what happened in history? We already agree. The tome, the decree of Chalcedon, it speaks of the two natures being in contemplation. We know that this wasn't mentioned, but this was decreed by Decree 7 of Constable II. This was always the Chalcedonians' belief. And yet, as I quoted during this debate, Cyril said, two natures is fine because the Antiochians understand them in theory. That's his point. And so just finding some quote somewhere where Cyril is angry at some polemicist that's being dishonest, and Cyril rightly calls that person out on their dishonesty, would not take away from Cyril's larger point about a whole synod of bishops. I think a lot of what Agen brought up today required a very, not quite even charitable reading, but hopeful reading of the sources. That we saw the into nature terminology used verbatim during Ephesus. And so when this is used verbatim in sources that affirm the one nature, which is there's a right way to do this, because again, we accept St. Cyril, then it's okay. But then when it's used by anyone else, then it's not okay. And we have to then get into all these arcane, random quotes out of context to kind of piece that together. This is why during my question and answer, I took the time to show theological terminology does change. And the saints understand this and are charitable with this. But what we see is after Chalcedon, the schismatic side was not charitable about this, generally speaking. They were very inconsistent. And for example, we hear that, oh, well, Dioscorus, he did not say that Chalcedon rejected double consubstantiality. I read during the quote, actually, let me read the quote, at least just in part, because that would be just not an accurate reading of Dioscorus. let's see, I hope it's here. He says, do not listen. This is the letter to the Egyptian monks. Do not listen to the soul-destroying words of the heretics who divide into two him who is one. Right? He defines who the people are. Right? And this is right in the minutes of Ephesus. It's not my brackets or whatever. Who divide into two him who is one. Those are the people that he is claiming dishonestly deny double consubstantiality, which again is crazy because it's explicitly affirmed during Chalcedon, but that's what he's claiming. So why would a side, if they're correct, become all of a sudden so inflexible theological terminology, become dishonest about that terminology, disagree explicitly with St. Cyril as Timothy the Cat did, right? And actually later on even enter in communion with Chalcedonians, knowing they accept Chalcedon and even accept, yes, there's a way which the tome can be accepted correctly. So we see all these different responses, but the one thing they won't compromise on is that they were wrong to start the schism to begin with, which, by the way, according to Timothy the Cat, he says the term, all the bishops were in favor of Chalcedon. Now, that's hyperbole. There was one or two. He was consecrated by one bishop out of his jurisdiction and one Egyptian bishop. But the majority of the Egyptian synod, which accepted Dioscorus' deposition, which, by the way, is allowable under the canons of Antioch, and someone delivering a summons isn't the judge against that person. It's like being a mailman when he serves you. Is he the court? No, he's giving you the serving papers. And so there's all this ad hocs to kind of explain
10 seconds.
away the obvious, the 10 seconds. And the obvious is this. Chalcedon Cyrillian and those who rejected it had political reasons at the time because they wanted to separate from the imperial church for nationalist reasons.
Time. Okay, I'll start my 5 minutes now. Maybe we can be fair, give Subdeacon a last 2 minutes. Maybe is that okay? If it's not,
take 3 and he could have 2.
Okay, we could do that. I'll start now. Rather than pointing out my flaws in this debate because there weren't any, that's typically what people do in closing statements. I would rather much continue what I was saying in response to his opening statement. I guess that'll be my closing statement. But to kind of summarize, his 4 ways to prove this debate was defining Nestorianism, which we showed. Nestorius taught one person in 2 natures. He said the exact same things Leo said in the quotes that he brought up that seemed like adoptionism. We have Leo saying that the one is inhabiting the one being born. He says that the creature is being assumed by the creator. The man is being assumed. And there's one being born in which God... he doesn't just use the word inhabit, he uses the word indwells, and you also find this in Flavian. When we also continue, you mentioned what Chalcedon affirmed. We see Chalcedon affirming the letter of Ebos, which he didn't want to admit, even granting my hypothetical, because it's very clear the letter of the clergy of Edessa was not cited by any adversary. What was only cited by the adversaries in this entire session was the letter of Ebos Tamari. Therefore, Maximus of Antioch is accepting the letter of Ebos Tamari. Why would they accept something which Cyrillian is using against Ebos? Oh, it's because Chalcedon isn't Cyrillian. The reason he doesn't want to think this way is because he doesn't want to grant the thing that necessitates this reading, which is necessitated by itself by reading the adversary's epistle. That's a tongue twister. If you listen to that slowly, you'll understand what I mean. He tried to say that Nestorius is joined with another person. We covered that. We can show Leo doing the same, as I said. We showed that Cyril condemned 2 natures after the union explicitly. We talked about the Glaphora. The Glaphora says that the 2 natures are separated into the concept and theory fitting each. He tried to mention how Chalcedon uses theoria, which I'll grant it doesn't. Not a single place in Chalcedon uses theoria. He's going to try and argue from the Greek of the tome. But granting that, if I grant it, you have Theodotus having Kyra at the Council of Ephesus says, if you appeal to rationalization in order to make your point, that there's 2 natures, you're still Nestorian, even if you're appealing to rationalization. Letter 44, we showed Cyril thought that the formula of reunion did not teach 2 natures after the union. He tried to cite Ambrose, which says that he speaks in both natures are in him, but according to De Fide, he mentions that both natures are in one nature, and in his sacrament on the incarnation, he says the holy prophet David describes as a giant because of that twofold and twin nature, which is one, a share of divinity and body. The Latin there for share is consource. He calls Christ the consource in the minutes of Ephesus. He mentioned Proclus's homily 24. Homily 24 is not in Greek, it's in Syriac. In Latin, they added the phrases after the union and added the phrase in. Those are not in the Syriac. The Syriac for the epistle prior says there's one kiana, one nature, in homily 23. He mentioned the letter to the Egyptian monks, trying to say that Dioscorus was saying that the Chalcedonians didn't affirm a double consubstantiality, but that's not true. He mentions the Daophysites and says they're heretics, and he says, and those talking about Eutychianists who say there isn't a consubstantiality of humanity. And the context of this is that this epistle has to do with the correspondence of the Second Council of Ephesus, which is dealt with the false interpretation of Eutychianism and the Nestorianism of Daophysitism. Now, we talked about us making schism just for a ethnic communion thing, political thing, but that's not the case when you look at the Eunoticon era. When you look at Ephesus 3, which is in 475, which had 500 to 700 bishops, he was not able to demonstrate Cyril being a Daophysite, nor saying the statement in two natures after the union once. We showed that the Creed of Chalcedon itself originally said from two, but they changed it to say into, because Dioscorus says from two and Leo says two. Thus, they disagreed with the Cyrillian statement and used the statement not found in Cyril. As for him saying Eutychus didn't affirm double consubstantiality, I didn't get to this part in my rebuttal period, but in the minutes of the Home Synod, he says, as you now say, said Eutychus, I agree in everything when Basil of Seleucia asked if the mother was consubstantial with us. And if he wants to argue this is a forgery, you also have, that was from the minutes of Home Synod. What you have from the minutes of Second Ephesus is the exact same citation in different wording. If it is befitting and proper to speak of the Virgin as consubstantial with us, this, my Lord, I confess. And then Dioscorus said we assent to this. So even in the minutes of the Home Synod, he says verbatim, I agree in everything when he was asked about consubstantiality. So in this debate, we saw special pleading when it came to the letter vibos. We saw appealing to forgeries, which is Homily 24, appealing to J.P. Migny's Latin coming from the Syriac. We also saw him special pleading when it came to Leo being reconcilable with the quote-unquote Alexandrian bishops whom he appealed to because they wouldn't have had their say. We also saw him give us the debate when he said Cyril was condemning two natures because people were being inconsistent. Well, guess what? Chalcedon was being inconsistent. The reason you condemn the Cilicians in the second letter to Zexensis for being inconsistent, we will not allow special pleading, and we'll also apply it to the Chalcedonians when they apply Entheoria, because that was your whole argument.
All right,
so that's my
you
time.
Definitely went over. Yeah, he definitely went over.
That's
and
exactly
there's no
0
time for Subdeacon, but he's going to have some time during Q&A. So, audience, you're going to have 20 minutes of questions, which we'll try to answer one and the other. Like, one Chalcedonian question and the other, and we'll try to be fair and give both sides an opportunity to respond. But before that, I want everyone to give plugs. Agen did a great job. Young dude, very smart, full of energy, does a lot of topics other than just this one. So how about you tell us about what you're up to, your YouTube channel, and because I really don't know. I just learned about apostolic Christianity.
Oh, I was on mute. Yeah, Apostolic Orthodoxy is my channel. It's the same as my name. I go by Agen. I started this channel, I think, this past year. It's been doing very well. Glory to God. Shout out also to Subdeacon. Subdeacon, I wouldn't have known anything if it wasn't for him. He was a really big help for me learning about Christology. I want to be an inspiration to other people. If you guys thought I did well, people who are Oriental Orthodox, I learned this very quick. You can ask Subdeacon. It really just takes wanting to be interested in this topic, and you can learn very easily.
I think it takes being young. So let me tell you, someone just asked, how do you feel after this debate? I feel old because I've read all these minutes and stuff, and I can't remember stuff as quickly as I used to. It's just the reality. But like when you're young, it's just like that. So it's definitely you'll learn quicker. But I like to think we old guys have muscle memory. So Subdeacon, you're closer to me than to Agen, I think. So how about you tell people about your channel and maybe what you thought of the debate? People hear from you a little bit.
I think it was a great debate on both sides for a first one. And I think that you guys already found some stuff that you want to debate more about in future debates. I'm guessing the letter of Phoebos is one of them. I think it went well. I don't think anybody did any ad hominems, nothing like that. So it was very respectful, and I look forward to future ones between you guys.
All right. And how about what plugs for your channel? What are you up to these days?
Yeah. So Lion's Den, YouTube at Daniel Kakish. I am Actually, we went to a monastery yesterday, and I'm invited to this concelebration liturgy tomorrow. I'm not home. This is a hotel room, so that's what I've been up to. And I have a few Lions Den episodes coming up. I just haven't. I'm waiting on confirmation on some of them, but I'll be posting.
All right, there you go. My plug is for, if this has blessed you, this content, please bless the Church of Cambodia at orthodoxchristiantheology.com/donate. The PayPal, Patreon, and Venmo are below. We have an anonymous donor that will match dollar for dollar up to $2,500 for the construction of the wall around the church in Sinakville, which was destroyed by the government. So you could double the your donation by just putting the word wall into the memo line. For all new Patreons, their first month will be matched dollar for dollar. So please support the Church of Cambodia. I'm very grateful, as we can see on screen, that orthochristian.com actually put up the video about the mission, and I will play a short appeal by the rector of the churches of Southeast Asia, Father Paisi Ipate. And so you guys can get a little bit of idea of what's going on in Cambodia.
Today a salvation come to the world. Let us sing to him who rose from the dead, the author of our life.
Hello, everyone. My name is Paisi. I'm the Dean of the Orthodox Parishes in the Kingdom of Cambodia. On behalf of our communities here in Cambodia, I would like to thank you for your generous donations. This is truly helping us to carry on with the needs of the mission, and the needs are multiple. I want to assure you of our deepest gratitude and prayers offered for you and for your families. Thanks to the efforts of our dear brother Craig Truglia, we receive all your donations and commemorate all of you by name.
And the video continues. You could see some of Pascha and choir practice. They're singing Gospodi Pomiloy and whatnot, which is interesting. But it's cool to see a lot of the people that I saw in Cambodia on video there, and now on orthochristian.com. So please support the mission. Every dollar you donate goes to that mission. So support the missionary work in Cambodia. So that being said, we will get started with questions and answers. We're shooting for 20 minutes. I don't want to go too far because I got other things to do this evening. I think Subdeacon Daniel Kakish, he's like bilocating. I'm not even sure if he's really at this debate or not. He's sort of in two places. I think Subdeacon, I think that you still need to work on your prayer life so that way you have more power in your bilocated self. Because I think you're somewhat subdued here. But anyway, that aside, we have plenty from Agen. This seems like an equal opportunity question. Are the Eastern Orthodox, Oriental Orthodox Joint Commissions a bunch of ecumenist nonsense from compromised theologians, or a genuine discussion with genuine conclusions of agreement? So how about you go first this time, Agen?
The formula of reunion, I think, was decently successful in that we got people to agree two natures in theory and one nature. But obviously that's under our respective understanding of what theory means. They'll have a different understanding of theory, but for the most part, we saw the reception of the agreed statements kind of negatively from the other side. You're welcome to comment on this, Craig. I might be wrong on this. But for this formula, an agreement, it's kind of built on the formula of reunion from 433, which I really like.
I would concur that ultimately the reunion of 433 is very important because it validates the use of two nature Christological terminology, which I think we need to, which is why in my thumbnail I have one finger up. we need to affirm one nature terminology, and we need to affirm two nature terminology, where Agen and I would disagree, and where I think there would be loggerheads among the bishops with these ecumenical attempts, would be that I feel that the Chalcedonian distinctions are important, they're necessary, and again, because I'm Eastern Orthodox, that they were superintended by God with further terminological distinctions made in diophysitism, diotheletism, as necessary to correctly expound the faith of the apostles. And what I think is avoided by a lot of these ecumenical attempts is, instead of hammering out the issues, it's sort of, well, let's reconcile, but no one has to say they're wrong. And I think in this case, there is a wrong side. And I do think that if we could more strongly affirm, like the language of Ephesus itself from St. Ambrose, that if we could, on the Chalcedonian side, more strongly affirm Cyrillian language, and whether it's from an Alpanarian forgery or not, it's kind of irrelevant. If it's quoted during an ecumenical council, they're quoting because what is there is true, right? Maybe it's not vouched for everything else written in the text, but what is written there is true, and we should affirm it rightly understood. All right, so we'll get to another question, and guys, please keep asking questions. We actually don't have a lot. It's more comments than anything. And I'd rather, being this is a debate, try to have questions. This is a question for me. Can you show concrete evidence of nationalism as a reason for schism when the bishops were very diverse in fact? And my evidence would be that it's the people that were on top, of course, were always Greek speaking, right? So we don't want to say, like, this is something ethnic as in specifically racial, because Egypt was all different ethnicities. The whole Roman world was. My interpretation of this historical evidence has to do with the fact that the real muscle behind the non-Chalcedonians, I don't say this to be mean, but was essentially street violence. And this was an ongoing issue in Alexandria. And the people doing this would have not been terribly diverse like the clergy. These would have been people against Roman rule and in favor of really a kind of proto-nationalism. And that's why it's not a mistake that a lot of these translations, like we have from Proclus, where I'm going to go with Constus. I would like to see published scholarship on it, supposedly not in the Syriac or whatnot. I actually have the Syriac, so maybe someone could go into it. But that being said, that we have so many homilies, preserved in Coptic and Ge'ez, that there's a reason why these Oriental Orthodox saints are within particular language groups, and it's not in Greek, because there was a certain impetus behind it around the people. I will admit that's an inference, though. Let me give a response to Agen.
You want me to talk about the Proclus stuff? I can mention that briefly.
If you want that response, or if Subdeacon wants to respond, but it sounds like you'll respond.
We talked a lot about it, but I think it's fair now that we have the time. Can I give you the translation I received from a scholar on how this Syriac is run?
Go right ahead, please.
It's as follows: if it were the case that Christ is a mere man, how did the Holy Virgin stay a virgin after his birth? We understand confessing the Christ as two natures of divinity and humanity. One, Jesus Christ, the unique Son. So that's where, when it was translated into Latin, they included the statement "in duabis naturis subsistere." That's not in the Syriac according to this translation. And if you want me to, this is completely up to you.
I seriously wonder, though, if there's a Greek fragment, because I can't imagine a scholar on the level of Constus, and I don't say that just randomly, because I have tons of his books behind me.
I think he's just translating Latin.
No, he cites the Greek, though. So it sounds to me there must be a Greek fragment.
I don't think so. The only Greek mention of this entire work, from what I found, is Ephraim of Amid, just mentioning the name of the work. And I can give you, because this isn't a collection, there's another Syriac text before Homily 24, it's Homily 23. Migny admits that the original manuscript says there's one nature, one Kiana, but he changes it to persona or something, or hypostasis.
Now, it's, again, because we have this fragment, which again, the consensus is citing. I don't know, it might be more than a fragment. I'm not sure. It just seems to me I read the Syriac translation because that's what's in, it's in the PG. That's what I used on PG 65/843 if people want to see the Latin translation. And for what it's worth, because I can't translate Syriac, when it says like, she is mother according to the substantia of the nature of the divine word, which was incarnate in her, it just seems to me that the loss of the Greek would be accurate with what it says elsewhere. So maybe it's not. I would like you to come out with the published translation. That more information is always useful to people. And that's why, like, all my notes I will release so people have my citations. I don't want to drag this with citations, but I'll release all my citations as well so people could scrutinize, because I'm not God, I can make mistakes. All right, so we have that. Let's go with this. Can you talk about Toledo 447? How about you go first, Agen? Unless you want me first. Or
Yeah,
Subdeacon.
Toledo Subdeacon is very familiar with Toledo.
Subdeacon, could you talk about Toledo 447?
Yeah, so it was under the auspices of Leo. In the West, it was in Spain. And it anathematizes anyone who says one nature after the union. It says the Son of God is not the Son of Man, something like that too. There's like 4 anathemas in there that we would have a problem with. It comes up in my conversations on Coptic Orthodox answers. We kind of go a little bit in depth on it, but it kind of gives you the idea that there's something going on in the West with Leo, and probably from his teachers, say like Augustine or Cassian or something like that, where there is this prevalent Diophysite Christology that's influencing the way he's like, as opposed to, say, obviously I'm Oriental Orthodox, so this is my opinion, that as opposed to Celestine or Julius or these guys. So then and there is scholarship on the connection between Augustine and Theodore of Mopsuestia that exists. So for Leo to affirm, to write this, I want everyone to know how this debate even came up. There was an AI generated Pokemon card on Twitter that someone posted.
What? Oh,
yeah. of Nestorius, and his move on the card was that something about 2 forms. And I'm sincerely asking on Twitter, I'm not trying to make problems, I'm sincerely asking, doesn't Leo say the same thing? There's about 2 forms. So then it goes, we have, me and Craig and I have a back and forth on there, and Craig proposes the debate with Agen, and Agen respectfully declined. I accepted, and Agen was added later. So,
which I'm glad we did, because I think Agen is definitely the best on this issue. So why not? Why not go against the best?
I think so too. May God preserve him. So, then, so with this Western connection with Theodore's, because Theodore, people don't know, because he kind of falls out of favor. He dies in communion with the church. He's the biggest Bible commentator in his time. He's a peer of Chrysostom. They were both students of Diodore of Tarsus, but Theodore was more famous than Chrysostom was, and while they were alive, as students, and Theodore becomes the teacher of that school. So, and the side that kind of is against Cyril, and when all that stuff is happening, is Theodore's school. They have the counter synod, and it's the same. Theodoret is Theodore's best student, and Theodoret, as Craig mentions, he says the letter of Alexandria from 497. Earlier in the debate, he mentioned it. The letter of Alexandria, a mistranslation of the tome into Greek, and explicitly says in the letter of Alexandria 497 that Theodoret translated the letter, the tome. So then at Chalcedon, it's seen from the Oriental Orthodox perspective that it is this side, it's Theodore's school and the influence of Theodore's school that's pushing this Christology from Toledo.
Now, I'll just say briefly on Toledo 447. It wouldn't be my favorite parsing of Christology. It's for Eastern Orthodox. It's not really a magisterial document. We know where have this, but I'm not going to say, well, that means it means nothing, right? It obviously was part of the Western inheritance, and they remained the communion for over 500 years. And like I mentioned during the debate, it seems like there's this hyper focus on when there's this hyper focus, like, well, when Chalcedonians use such terminology, it's really bad. It's like, you killed your mother. But when non-Chalcedonians use it, it's okay. It's legit. And so, like, I posed this on Twitter, I think during the same thing. When I was quoting Dioscorus, I said, who said this? And so I think one person even said Nestorius. And it said, Dioscorus writes in the letter to the Egyptian monks, he was born of the Father as God, and that the same was born of Mary as man. Men saw him as man walking on the earth, and they saw him, the creator of the host, as God. They saw him sleeping in the ship as man, and they saw him walking upon the waters as God. They saw him hungry as man, on and on and we go. So it's not that like we can't find these things in Cyril, even Dioscorus. So it just seems to me a really inconsistent treating of Toledo 447 to say, oh, well, when you say it, it's somehow wrong. So that's how I feel about it. We have this, a quick little question. Will any of the Oriental Orthodox in this panel debate Luigi on a neutral platform like the Crucible on this subject?
Yeah, I would do it.
There we go. Subdeacon Daniel says yes. I just think any platform should be somewhere where there isn't tons of curse words and things like that flying. I think that's extremely unprofessional. And it's not only unprofessional, unchristian.
We could do it on your platform, Craig.
Oh, Luigi's gonna have a platform. You also have one, but yes, I would happily take all the clicks from that. But yeah, but somewhere without all the cursing.
If he agrees on that, I'd be completely willing. I don't think he's gonna agree though.
Yeah, I don't
if he's watching this, let's do it.
With cursing or no cursing?
Did I curse at you today?
No. I mean, would you go on a channel with cursing or no cursing?
I'd go on Craig's channel, the best.
There you go. Oh, the best. Yeah. Or Agent's channel is bigger than mine. You're going to be an Agent channel. But yes, I will take your charity and give it to Cambodia. So anyway, off-topic question to everyone in the panel. What are your thoughts on Chaldean and Syro-Malabar Catholics? Do Orthodox believe they are Nestorians or Orthodox?
This is a beautiful question. Craig.
You can answer. I got no opinion.
There's a priest, a Chaldean Catholic priest in San Diego. I know him. But he put out a video on Christology. Agen and I reviewed the video on an episode we did on Lion's Den before. But I would love for you to see the video. I actually want to know what you think. I don't think you'd agree with him, this guy. I really don't.
All right. We have this from Dioscorus. Flavian II Antioch was in Chalcedonia. He anathematized Chalcedon by mouth, but not by heart, and this is why he was deposed. And Flavian II is a Eastern Orthodox saint, and he's also a Roman Catholic saint, and he's kind of a tragic figure in this regard, sort of like Hosius of Cordoba, who accepted a Arianized creed. I think the Coptic Synaxarion also, like the Eastern Orthodox, accepts Pope Liberius as a saint, who also signed a Arianized creed. And so, yes, if someone's being tortured and intimidated, it's not good when they fold to some of these compromises. But we actually do have examples of this in the saints, and the fact that he was non-canonically deposed anyway would seem to vindicate that in the end he decided to stick with Chalcedonianism. That would be our charitable reading of our own saint. But the point is, before this, there was communion without him anathematizing Chalcedon, especially John I. He had a rockier relationship with John II. And a lot of this is in the introduction of that book from C.T.R. Haywood and Severus of Antioch, if people want to read more about it. I don't know who wants to give a response to that.
I agree.
Yeah, I'm thinking that's a subdeacon question.
Yeah, I agree with you, Craig. I don't believe in the duress stuff. Like anybody who gives an answer by duress is not genuine. It's not sincere or real. Shouldn't be taken as an official thing. But you know who that includes, Craig? That includes Vigilius.
And it also includes Eutyches, who
And
under
includes
duress,
Theodoret. It includes Theodoret, right?
under duress confessed double conceptuality.
Yeah, it includes Theodoret too.
It's yeah, let's talk about that because I think there'll be some common ground. In session 8 of Chalcedon, right? Theodoret's like eating humble pie. Yeah, I love Cyril. We're homies now. I'm like, no, you're not. Oh no, we're totally homies. And then in the end, they're like, so why don't you anathematize in the story? It's like, oh, I've already done it. We'll do it now. Oh, I've done it 1,000 times. We'll do it now. It's very hilarious to read because it's pretty obvious that Theodoret had to be really pushed into doing it.
Mhm.
And that's me speaking as the historian and maybe not as the apologist, but I think there's some good reading, especially sessions 8, 9, and 10.
That's why me and you
and
have
it's-
gotten along so well all these years, because we always talk to each other as historians, not as apologists.
Well, sometimes I put historian hat on or apologist hat off.
Yeah.
So we'll go to another question because we're running out of time here. Ephesian Christology was foundational, but not yet fully developed, hence the need for further councils. Was Nicaea insufficient? Why were more councils after that? So this might be someone maybe a little newer. So do you mind if I answer this one first?
Go ahead.
Neither the Oriental Orthodox or the Eastern Orthodox affirm doctrinal development, right? So what we didn't need was more councils because somehow the faith was incomplete. In fact, the presumption in all these councils is the faith is complete, which is why they'll even give florilegium of the fathers teaching a particular doctrine. The idea is this is already settled. So it's in the scriptures, it's in the fathers, this is already settled. And so the utility of these councils is that the consensus of the bishops is understood to be the direction of the Holy Spirit. And so when they come up with some sort of clarification to crystallize the teaching of the fathers, or to crystallize perhaps an error, which might be a false reading of the fathers, we would understand that as an important work of the council in preserving the faith. This is why we have theology and apologetics, right? Hopefully when I'm doing a good job as an apologist, or when Agen is doing a good job as an apologist, it's not because we're coming up with new ideas. It's because we are accurately repeating what has already been said, but perhaps communicate in a way where it's now easier to understand, or perhaps more specific to perhaps the modern polemical situation or something like that. And so that would be the utility of councils. We see it's something that the Holy Spirit gives to the church. It's like the council in Jerusalem to come up with an answer to the questions. Not that the Psalms and the scriptures themselves speak of the Gentiles being brought into the people of God, but a council was held by the apostles themselves to say, yes, this is indeed the case. This is the correct understanding of the scriptures and the correct understanding of what happened to St. Peter after he baptized Cornelius' family, like we read about Acts 10 to 11. So anyway, that's my response. I don't know if either of you want to add anything to that.
I'd just say something very short. We see Ephesus as it doesn't need another Christological council. Like Craig said, it's not incomplete or imperfect. I think when you look at the Chalcedon, it's very point of convening, which Marcion mentions. I think by the end of session 5 or beginning of session 6, we've done the main goal of the council, which is make a new creed, which is what the emperor wanted, and confirm the Tome of Leo. I think such a thing is unnecessary. Christology was solved in 431. What you really see, and this is a statement me and Subdeacon say all the time, the losers of 431 won at Chalcedon, and then the winners of 431 lost at Chalcedon. That's the statement we repeat over and over. So we don't see Chalcedon in any way being needed, let alone in any way being reconciled with the prior council. Because it's one thing to say it's not needed. It's another thing to say, even if it, quote unquote, was needed, it would be impossible. It'd be a contradiction.
All right. And so I thought I highlighted one for you. One second. Darn it. They keep asking it. So I really want to ask it just so they stop asking it. For you, Agen, why does Severus say the divine essence is a genus?
Severus answers, for that which is above ousia in all respects is, in that it is, therefore it ill become you, plotting undue things to oppose the words of the doctors with empty attacks. But again, when I said that no one ever applies propriety with any precision to God, as he would to things which are subject to definitions, and I introduced the chapter of Evagrius who wrote, if either genus or species or difference or property or accident is affirmed for every inquiry, yet none of the above mentioned can be found to apply in the case of the Holy Trinity, let us worship in silence what is inexpressible. For it is clear that from the start that ousia is something other than a propriety, for propriety appears in relation to ousiai, but it is necessary that you attribute accident as well to God and those other things from which definitions are brought together, and thus you bring God under the limitations of definitions. So Severus is pretty clear. You don't apply the created category of genus to the Holy Trinity, and that you worship without applying these proprietary.
I don't have too much opinion on a lot of these terminological quibblings. For one, the scriptures explicitly warn against quibbling over words. It doesn't mean we could use any words we want willy-nilly, but the idea is we shouldn't be arguing. You said this word in a slightly wrong way. We should at least make sure it's said wrong and it means something wrong. And that's why I wanted to make clear during this debate, because I don't know what my opponents are going to say. Right, like Nestorius very clearly expounds adoptionism. He very clearly says there's two bodies, and there's a body and a lame person, and one of them picks the other one up as a way of illustration. So he actually tells you what his concept is. So you could say when he says that there are two hypostases, two natures, two essences, we know exactly what he means by it, because and that's in the Bizarre Heraclides, where he says two hypostases, two this, two that. That he uses every theological terminology and even gives an illustration to make it abundantly clear that's what he means by it. Now, like, so you take someone like Severus or even Cyril, they're sometimes inconsistent with how they use their own terminology, depending on the instance of what they're answering. And that's any of us in real conversation. So the fact that when anyone would quibble over that stuff, I don't think is very useful. We have to deal with conceptual theology, I think, on these questions.
And one more thing on that. To kind of support Craig's main point, not to quibble over these words, John of Damascus uses the same exact word, applies it to the divine essence. But like, you've never seen me make the argument, like, for example, John of Damascus affirming essence is a mere created genus. I never make that argument. But he uses the same term there.
Oh, there you go. We have, I'll bring this up. Craig, what are your thoughts on the interpretation of St. Cyril on the formulary union in his letter 44 that says one nature of the Son? I don't have letter 44 in mind. I did think very carefully about the second letter of Sixensis. And the reason is because I think he kind of, the whole letter is him interpreting what is one nature of the word incarnate even mean. And I think I really distilled it and did real justice to that. And so let me just get it down. I wrote it down for myself. Where are you? And here we go. Essentially, what I believe it means primarily is that there's one divinely originated essence that is assumed, or is it that has assumed created human essence. All right. And so it's not quite, he's speaking of essences, it's not quite he's speaking about persons. There's a reason why the term feces is used, because if you look it up, it does speak to origin. It's actually like I think feces in the Greek is like the root of a tree or beginning of a branch is what the terminology actually means. And it's that subtlety where it pertains to both essence and origin, which I think really brings out what he's getting at. And you go, well, that sounds nuts. Here, I think, again, very distilled in second letter of Sixensis. I'm just going to quote word for word what Cyril says. He says, the word of God is paragraph 2. The word of God himself, I'll reverse a little bit. He says one nature of the word incarnate, and then he explains the word of God himself, the only begotten from God's own essence, through whom are all things, who became incarnate and was made man. And then in paragraph 4, what does become incarnate made man mean? the assertion of our human essence is implied by the word incarnate, right? So I think when I summarize Saint Cyril, what he means is that there's one divinely originated essence that assumed created human essence. I think the thrust of what he's saying is not that, maybe later rationalizations that there is a composite essence or something. I'm not even going to reject that or prove it. It's not my point. I just don't think that's the thrust of his point. He's making an observation about the origination of the essences. And it's a lovely wordplay in that way, because you have a divine essence without origin being one with a human essence that has origin. So you have one nature of Christ that's both uncreated and created. And I think that's really the mystery there that he's expounding. I would presume, being that I think Second Light of Successus, it says it elsewhere. I just distilled it. It says it in tons of detail. My presumption is letter 44 does the same. Let me give Agen or Subdeacon Daniel a response.
Yeah, the formula of reunion, we talked a lot about it throughout the debate. The way we view the formula of reunion is that it was only accepted when the statement "from to" is offered. In letter 40, Paul of Emesa tries to bring forward a document. Cyril rejects it. Paul of Emesa brings forth another document that says "from two natures," and that's when Cyril accepts it. And I compare that to when the Creed of Chalcedon had a draft that said "from to," and then the Roman legate said you have to change it now to "into," because Dioscorus says "from to," Leo says "to." So you kind of see the contrast. The formula of reunion is supposed to be read Miaphysite because that's how Cyril read it. And anyone who read it otherwise, Cyril condemned. For example, Epistle 63, Epistle 67. So the formula of reunion safeguards the unity. It doesn't affirm two natures after the union from our perspective.
We have this for Agen. What is to be said concerning the second homily of Paul of Emesa, preaching the Church of St. Cyril, teaching two natures post-union, not etra kai etro, but etron kai etron?
What's there to be said? Nothing. This is from Justinian. Why should I accept this work as authentic? It's not independently attested outside of Justinian. If we want to talk about Cyril being present for homilies, let's talk about the homily of Saint Theodotus, which says oide diophysis, nor two natures. Let's talk about the homily of Saint Theodotus, which said they did not merely nail the visible nature, they brought their daring to God who is in it, who had appropriated the sufferings of the united nature. I mean, like, we can appeal to, Cyril supposedly sat and listened to this Diophysite homily. But if the homily, you first hear about it in the Constantinople 2 days, what do you mean, what is there to say about it? Nothing is to be said. I don't accept that homily. I don't think it's a real homily that was delivered.
I would add, this is why, in general, I don't think any questionable text should be the meat of an argument. So like here, I cautiously use the text from St. Proclus only because I felt that the same exact concept abounded in additional fragments of other homilies on the same topic. It wasn't like they were in Greek, in Coptic, in Ge'ez. So that's why I felt, well, there's something going on here that's worth talking about. But in general, like, what we don't want to do is make our case off questionable text. It's how Roman Catholics offend the filioque. Well, how do you explain this fragment from Fulgentius of Rusp? And you're like, well, this fragment's preserved in a pro-filioque florilegium in the late 9th century, nowhere else. Like, maybe it's real, but why would you want that to be the meat of your argument? You would want more reliable text.
Right. Good point.
And that's why, like, even if you read the open source translation of Book 10 of Saint Cyril's homilies on the Gospel of John, it has a lot of Diophysite language, and it was too good to be true. So I actually had to go into the Greek and weed out a lot of the stuff because it wasn't actually in the Greek. And so even with translations of extant texts, we really need to do our due diligence and be critical with these things. I kept a lot of these things. Agen was very civil and professional. He didn't say, I don't think that's really there. I think once or twice, but that's why I kept a lot of the terminology. Like, I have it. If I recall to ask, where does it say this word? What is the word? I could go look it up because it is there, because I went and looked it up in the original languages. We have 2 more questions because otherwise we'll be here all night. this is for me. If distinction is not in contemplation and Christ not in two natures, how do you avoid Christ being a third type of being, some of humanity? Could someone translate the question for me? Because I do affirm Christ in two natures in contemplation. Does someone know what he's trying to say?
He did a typo. He did a typo. He's trying to
So
say
what's he trying to say?
He's saying if distinction is in contemplation and Christ is not in two natures. So he put not twice. He's confused. But
So meaning if it's in contemplation, he is not in two natures. And in my response would be St. Cyril says that these properties are real and persist. And so they're real. That's why he will occasionally say, like in second letter Sixensis, in divine nature, in human nature. There's nothing wrong with saying in this nature, in that nature, but it has to be understood that they're in a single person. This might help. Let me just here's how Chalcedon could be wrongly understood, right? Because this is what Nestorius would say. He would say, we believe in one prosperon of Christ, just in two natures. And he said, oh, it's pretty much the same as Chalcedon. He saw it as vindication, or in my opinion, he pretended it was vindication. We have to remember these are polemical things. But Nestorius' idea is like a Pokeball with two Pokemon in it, being that we're getting to Pokemon apologetics, right, Subdeacon? So you have to imagine capturing two Pokemon in a single Pokeball, right? The Pokeball is the Prosperum. You go, well, it's one Pokeball, so it's one Pokemon. Even though there's two Pokemon in it. And I don't think, honestly, that's what Nestorius would have. He would have been down with that, because he would have the brain rot playing the video games too, I'm sure. But that being said, that's not what Chalcedon meant. That's not what Leo meant. And so that would not be the right concept, but it does kind of show how that concept could be wrongly understood because it is distorting in that fashion. So Agen, let me give you an opportunity to respond.
Yeah, his question is, if it's in contemplation and Christ is not in two natures after the union, why is Christ not a third thing? First of all, the union is between individual realities, the word and the flesh. It's not between ousia. If we said that it was between ousia, you probably have a point about there being a third thing. There'd be a third essence, a third common generality, whatever that may be. What we think is in the mind is the division into two, numerical distinction. For us, we think that enumerating is division in that category. For example, the fathers say, the hypostasis of the Father is divisible from the hypostasis of the Son. It's divided from the hypostasis of the Son. Division is just counting. So we think the division into two is going to be in the mind. What's in reality is a qualitative distinction. That's why there's not a new third thing. We still say, like Cyril said, the difference is only in natural quality, the difference of the natures or hypostases in plural. So there wouldn't be a third thing because we maintain a qualitative distinction. And what's in the mind, what's in the intellect is numerical distinction. The countability ceases after the union, but the properties, like Craig said, I agree with him on that part. The properties remain. He says this in his Unorthodoxy to Theodosius, that Christ is composed of suprahuman and super divine properties in one in-between thing. He doesn't use the word third thing, like Tertullian argues meophysitism would be. Tertullian uses the word tertium quid. Cyril doesn't say third thing. Cyril says in-between thing, because for him, the properties still remain in this one thing.
All right, we have to Agen, why were multiple Miaphysites, and I'm going to ask a question right before you answer this question. Willingly in communion with Chalcedonians, was this a compromise or dishonesty on their part? My question would be the term Miaphysite. Mia is not a suffix, so wouldn't it be like, why is that term used? Shouldn't it be monophysite just without a negative connotation?
I guess.
Go ahead.
I guess the term Mia, and I want you to answer the question he asked, Subdeacon, please. That's your specialty. I think it's a modern term.
So it's one of those, like, you could call each other monophysites, but we just got to be a little more careful. It's like,
I don't mind.
You say monophysite, you go monophysite.
I never had a problem with the term. My own side gets mad at me for not having a problem with the term. I don't have a problem with being called.
You're a stickler to Greek grammar.
I don't care. Call me monophysite. Yeah. Okay. Call me Jacobite too. Whatever.
I have some issue just because of a modern connotation now. It's been propagated. Monophysis means divine only. So I think I'm careful with it. We don't call ourselves monophysites. I think miaphysite.
I felt so embarrassed though when I found out that it's actually just incorrect terminology. It's just like it sounds like nonsense if you said it in Greek. So that's why I'm going to stick with non-Chalcedonian because it's accurate. But anyway, the question, Subdeacon, because that was a fun little aside.
Yeah.
Why did they willingly go and commune with Chalcedonians? Was this compromise or dishonesty, or how would you want to explain it?
I don't know what he's referring to. If he's referring to the
John the First and Communion Flavian the Second, the Henoticon era.
Henoticon era, we understand that era to be that the Eastern Chalcedonians, because obviously Rome wasn't in communion, that the Eastern Chalcedonians conceded.
So your point is
That's
they
why Rome
understood
communicated that.
So you understood that they went to communion because they considered it a full renunciation.
Yeah.
Okay. I guess my answer to the question would be more nuanced in this. I don't think they understood it as a full renunciation simply because they were aware that certain saints like Flavian II did accept Chalcedon, and depending on who was there, they had machinations against this. Particularly Severus was much less tolerant of it, but even then, Severus was political and adept. Like, he didn't make an outright enemy out of Timothy I of Constantinople, who was a Chalcedonian. So I think it's like no one wants to do this because we all want to argue terminology and that side's totally wrong, that side's totally right. But if we remove the political subterfuges and machinations that exist on both sides, you really don't have an accurate understanding of what occurred. I think this era is much more in common with the modern era than people want to admit.
I think so. Yeah.
It's even though the agreement made between the Chalcedonians and non-Chalcedonians has since fallen apart, the one made in 1991, that joint statement, I'd say the spirit of it still exists. It hasn't been so publicly denounced and, like, for example, as compared to the Formula Hormistas, right? And now we see why Pope Hormisdas was so adamant about people subscribing to a formula or a similar one that would clearly affirm Chalcedon and denounce the non-Chalcedonian saints, because he wanted a actual reversal of policy, not a tolerance. But this shows, even if it's, I think everyone on this panel here would say, we don't think the Henoticon policy was good. I think, right, we're all kind of conservatives and traditionalists. I think we all must concede that sanctity is still possible through that means, because we have saints on both sides that did it. Maybe it was imprudent. Maybe now, because we have more hindsight and we have parallel hierarchies, it would be far more imprudent and far more worse than it was when it was in its day, when there was still just one church. There was just communions that either be in communion or out of communion. There wasn't dueling hierarchies during that era. So I think, long story short, it does show that, because we see in the 497 letter, they're willing to grant there's an orthodox way to deal with these things. Maybe that was something that they're hoping to concede so that over time that could lead to people just denouncing it entirely, or some sort of reunion council. Because I see Severus would be willing to do this if he won the day in 536. That would correct the definition or make a better definition or something like that. But that being said, it does show that it wasn't just like the issue of divorce between Roman Catholics and Eastern Orthodox was not something that divided them enough where that was going to continue the schism in the Council of Florence. In the same way, even Chalcedon and the Tome weren't something that were absolute deal breakers, like the Filioque would be, or like, quoting Nestorius and calling it doctrine would be. It's somewhere in the middle. And I'll say this, I'm going to do more on this era, because a lot of the assumptions of, let's say, the true Orthodox and the Eastern Orthodox side are totally inconsistent with this era of history. They don't have a good answer as to why do we have saints that have an ecclesiology which is clearly at odds with the true Orthodox communions today. And it's just reality. It's not that they're wrong. I think on both our sides, we affirm it's good there were people that are uncompromising. So, right, it's not to own them. It's to make a larger ecclesiological and hagiographic observation that it's not an absolute deal breaker to be compromised in that way, as long as you are personally affirming to the correct principles.
Also, imperial implication. Yeah.
And so that's that. So anyway, I think we've gone a good long time. We're over time by about 20 minutes. It's been a lot of fun having everyone on. I am grateful for Sadiq and Daniel. Hopefully next time, if you came on when things are tough, I know you want to go a different part of the day. I've got family to attend to, which affects my schedule. So I really appreciate your flexibility and your love for the topic that you came on anyway, even in imperfect circumstances.
Yeah. Thank you, Craig. We always appreciate it.
And again, it was really great to have someone on. It reminds me of, I forget, it was Paul Ibrahim back in the day who debated David Erhan. Just a young guy, full of energy, very smart. May God give you that enthusiasm to serve him. And it's just great to be on with someone that could unpack this stuff as quickly compared to an old guy like me. He's like, oh, I'd have to reread. I can't remember exactly where it is there. That is a sight to behold. So I'm very grateful for you being on as well.
Yeah, it was an honor for me to be on. And can I just say something to put it on the record? Just a very tiny retraction from when we were talking. I made a little mistake when you asked me about the homoi osios and homoousios. You were right. Homoi osios was accepted in De Senores, but only on the condition that it's identical essence. So my mistake there. I was thinking of another work.
Yeah,
you were right on that point.
And I'll grant that without remembering much more on it, but specifically because Athanasius was allowing that these people aren't our enemies. They mean the same thing. They're just hung up on the terminology. So yeah,
right. And you're making that, you're connecting that with the three hypostases and one hypostasis discussion. Yeah, so I get that. I was thinking of the other party of the homoi osions who Athanasius opposed.
Now I'll make a retraction if I could find it very quick in these minutes of Chalcedon, because you're making me go by memory. And I'm trying to find the part where it talks about the good old third letter Nestorius. Because man, do I wish I just read it, so it would have avoided a lot of this issue. It would have made things a lot more dicier than Dioscorus, because he was still in the outs regardless. So it would have made him act even I feel more desperately.
Yeah, it's session 2, line 29. You're looking.
I just found the moment you said it. So we have Atticus. He said, we should also be provided with the letter of the blessed Cyril written to Nestorius, in which he urged him to assent to the 12 chapters, so that at the time of examination we may be found well prepared. Next verse. The most devout bishops exclaimed, if you order this to be granted, we request that the fathers take part in the examination. Then, verse 31, the most magnificent, glorious officials and exalted Senate said, the hearing will be adjourned for 5 days, so in the meantime, your holiness may meet in the residence of Antonius and deliberate together, so the objectors may be instructed. And verse 32, all the most devout bishops exclaimed, right? So the same bishops. We believe accordingly. We all believe accordingly. As Leo, so we believe. None of us raises any objections. We have already signed. Then verse 33, the most magnificent and glorious officials in the exalted Senate said, it is not necessary for you all to meet, but since it is appropriate to convince all the objectors, let the most devout Archbishop Anatolius select from among the bishops who have signed those he considers competent to instruct the objectors. So I'll make a concession now. First, session 5, they're definitely all being unruly, and maybe that was a real reason, but that's not the reason given here. It sounds like they want to select people specifically. And then verse 34 repeats, the most devout bishops exclaim, we have a request concerning the fathers, restore the fathers to the council. Those who agree with Leo to the council, the fathers to the council. Report our acclamations to the emperor. Report these petitions to the Orthodox one. Report these petitions to the
Augusta. That's what I was saying. That's after the 5-day thing.
But do you see how it connects? So I will grant that the reasoning sounds like more like what you were saying, but my memory was correct. My old man memory was better than I thought. Because right after verse 29, where he says, let's read the third letter, you have the interruption. If you order this be granted, we request the fathers take part in the examination. And that's why they deleted. So it would have been read right then. And it seems like it was used as a political football to try to restore the fathers of Ephesus too. And it's pretty much a tragedy, which I cover in the Subterfuge Chalcedon. Because if that didn't occur, it would have been read. They would have affirmed it, because they were affirming everything, and we wouldn't. This problem would be a lot less complicated, though. I don't think it's all that complicated personally. I'll put this away later. But there we go. So we got some more context there and some more concessions on both sides. So that's great. So Agen, anything you want to add, being that we had a little discussion of that about that section?
Yeah, like I was saying, they wanted to someone asked to read it, and then they wanted to like examine it for the prior statement as well. They wanted to examine the prior statements when they cited Cyril 3 times. And then after, I think you said line 34 is when they wanted to bring back the Father. So
line 30 and line 34.
Okay, yeah.
So 29
But yeah,
and
I think
30.
it was a good discussion. I'm sorry, Subdeacon, I talked for a lot of it. Maybe we should have earlier. I think it would have been better if we're gonna do this again.
It worked out the right way. Don't worry.
Yeah, this would be one of those where, like, if and I presume he's still doing it. I don't follow too closely. Let's say David Urhan was here and you were here, Agen. That all the highly philosophical, specialized stuff would be you guys, and Subdeacon and I would be dealing with the broader historical and ecclesiastical stuff, because that's more our wheelhouse. And we kind of did that once, which was fun.
Yeah.
We did that twice actually, so that was great. But that being said, Agen, great having you on. And audience, great having you here. Everyone mostly good behavior. We know that bishops follow these guys here, and so this is something where it'll be interesting to very important people, and I'm grateful to be part of it. So anyway, I'm going to call it a night. God bless everyone. I'm going to end the show as I end all of them by quoting Jesus, Sirach. Fight to death for the truth, and the Lord God will fight for you. God bless you. Have a great day.